Humanity finally won the war. They took down the 6 great demon gods who tried to end the world. Even the big boss, the demon god of the ruined sea, was put in the ground. But victory came at a price. The surface was already gone, swallowed by the sea of death. Humanity is on the brink of total extinction. Se-Hoon stares at the ruins, wondering why winning feels exactly like losing. The Tower of Heroes is a pile of rubble now. The sea isn't stopping, even with its creator dead. The blacksmith laughs at the absurdity as the world throws its final tantrum. Yom Sung-ha, known as the Mad Dog, scoffs at him for acting like he's the main character. Liu's Valent tells him to stop faking it and shut up. Amir Singh thinks the guy has just been riding their coattails. Se-Hoon reminds them they'd be dead without the gear he made. The heroes are stunned by the disrespect. He tells the 3 dogs to quit whining and give back his stuff if they're so mad. These guys aren't real heroes. They're just opportunists who look out for number 1. They never cared about humanity. They just did whatever served them best. They sat back while everyone else died, just so they could be the ones standing at the end. They technically contributed the most, but only because they outlived the better people. Se-Hoon wonders if things would have turned out differently if they just fought sooner. He looks at the dying group, asking if any of them are actually going to pull through. Yom Sung-ha admits he's finished. His organs are complete mush. Liu's Valent is a goner too. Her heart's been pierced. The blacksmith just sighs, telling them this is exactly why they should have helped earlier. He keeps laying into them for being selfish bastards until the end, but he realizes they've already stopped listening. The 3 dogs are gone, leaving him as the last soul on Earth. He forces himself to stand up, mocking the heroes for being a pain even while dying. He reaches for his hammer. Se-Hoon is not done yet. He's got one last thing to make. The massive tsunami looms over the highway ruins. He looks at the broken weapons on the ground, useless even as gravestones. He stares directly at the approaching death. He knows his time is up too. Standing before the massive wave, he decides to go out with a bang. This is going to be the final masterpiece of the last blacksmith. He reaches into his own chest, focusing his mana. Electricity crackles around his hands as he activates his hidden talent. He's performing a bond extraction, targeting his own fate. This is his unique skill, Blacksmith of Bonds. It extracts special ores based on his connection with a target. He pulls out a colorless ore, a material as empty as his regrets. He looks at the colorless ore, thinking that if it's empty, it should at least carry the weight of his regrets. With the world ending around him, he brings his hammer down with everything he's got. The massive wave of the ruined sea looms over him, and he realizes the sound of the water is the same one he's heard since he first awakened. He keeps hammering, the ringing in his ears louder than ever. Usually, that sound meant he was about to create something that defied imagination. Se-Hoon looks down at the result, disappointed that it doesn't seem to have any special power. He holds up the finished blade, cursing how incredibly plain it turned out to be. As the dark water swallows him, he decides he'd rather go out with his own creation in hand. The blacksmith grits his teeth, refusing to just let the waves take him without a fight. Sinking into the abyss, he laughs at himself for choosing to spend his final moments hammering away. Drifting through the cold darkness, a sudden realization hits him. That sound he's been hearing his whole life. It was the sound of the ruined sea all along. Se-Hoon wonders if things would have been different if he'd noticed it sooner, or if he'd spent less time forging for dogs, and more time helping people who actually deserved it. Suddenly, a system window flickers to life in the depths, announcing the manifestation of the gear's imagery. More alerts flood his vision, as the dagger begins to glow with an eerie light. A hidden skill called Return to Origin is unleashed, surging through the water. He hears a voice calling out to him, using a title he hasn't heard in over 3 decades. Se-Hoon wakes up to an angry instructor, yelling at him for zoning out during an entrance exam. He looks around the workshop in shock, realizing he's back at Babel, 31 years in the past. It's hard to believe his eyes, especially since the phantom of the dagger he just forged is still floating there. The regressor wonders if his own bond stone really just rewrote his entire life. The unknown instructor gives him a final warning, threatening to kick him out on the spot. He stares at his younger reflection in the polished surface of his hammer. If he can master his abilities sooner this time, maybe he can actually change the future. He tightens his grip on the handle, pushing aside the confusion. There's only one thing that matters now, seizing this second chance with both hands. A sharp, confident smile spreads across his face. This time, he isn't going to let anything be destroyed. Se-Hoon's goal is clear: get into Babel and track down the 3 dogs. That's where everything begins in this life. He brings the hammer down with total focus. The ringing sound is so intense it startles everyone in the workshop, including the gray-haired professor watching from the side. The professor stares, sensing something different about this particular cadet. Each strike is heavy and deliberate, sending sparks flying across the anvil. It looks slow, but the rhythm is perfect, A clear, consistent ring without a single mistake. Finally, Se-Hoon finishes the blade, and it's practically glowing with quality. The entire workshop goes dead silent as they look at the finished work. Assistant Han, a nervous young man with reddish-brown hair, can't believe a cadet actually made something this good. Han is completely floored by the sheer quality of the weapon. The professor realizes they've just witnessed an incredible performance, but instead of turning it in, Se-Hoon raises his hammer for one more strike. He smashes the sword to pieces right on the anvil, shocking everyone in the room. He's not satisfied at all, calling his own work nothing more than trash. As a blacksmith, Se-Hoon can't stand the thought of submitting something so mediocre. Han loses it, shouting at Se-Hoon for destroying a masterpiece right in front of the inspector. Se-Hoon just turns to the professor and calmly asks to redo the whole assignment. Han is still fuming, but the professor's focus is entirely on Se-Hoon. The professor tells Han to go ahead and bring some more materials. Han tries to argue, but one stern look from the professor shuts him down. He rushes off to get the supplies before the professor loses his patience. Se-Hoon waits, looking completely unfazed by the pressure. The professor reminds him there are only 40 minutes left in the exam, but Se-Hoon just nods. Looking at the shards on the floor, the professor wonders if the kid really knows what he's doing. Se-Hoon stares at the forge, his eyes glowing with determination. He refuses to turn in a result he isn't proud of. The professor tells him to give it his best shot then. Se-Hoon locks in, focusing every bit of his mana for the final push. He knows his current body is too weak, and the clock is working against him. The only way to pull this off is to use his most effective technique right now. He heads back to the fire, leaving the other cadets wondering what he's planning. Suddenly, he starts pouring mana directly into the ignition stones, which is incredibly dangerous. He stunned everyone by tossing the stones straight into the roaring flames. Another cadet watches in terror, convinced the stones are about to blow up the whole workshop. Instead of an explosion, the forge bursts into a stunning display of multicolored flames. Han panics and starts yelling for a fire extinguisher. He begs the professor to let him put it out, but he's told to stay back. The professor tells him to look closer. The flow of these flames isn't out of control at all. It's the five-colored fire demon, a high-level technique used to supercharge the forge. Se-Hoon stands before the rainbow fire, looking like he's right at home in the extreme heat. It takes incredible control, but it's the perfect way to forge high-level gear even with low mana. The workshop falls silent as the fire stabilizes. It didn't explode after all. Professor Kim In-cheol watches closely as the color of the iron ingot begins to shift right before his eyes. He realizes that Se-Hoon resonated the ignition stones on purpose to boost the heat and alter the ingot's properties. It's a clever way to cut down on forging time, but with only 30 minutes left, the pressure is still on. The professor knows Se-Hoon is good, but if he doesn't pick up the pace, he's not going to make it. Se-Hoon doesn't seem worried, swinging his hammer with relentless focus. Each strike rings out with incredible power, sparking off the anvil. Se-Hoon's expression remains locked in as he keeps his eyes on the prize. He plunges the metal back into the intense, multicolored flames. The ingot glows with a rainbow aura, absorbing the massive heat of the forge. Se-Hoon is sweating through the heat, pushing his limits to stay on schedule. His hammer strikes are like thunder, vibrating through the entire workshop. He's putting everything he has into these final swings, knowing time is slipping away. His mana finally runs out and his protection wears off, leaving his body to take the full brunt of the work. His hands start to bleed from the sheer vibration and strain of the hammer, but he doesn't slow down for even a second, ignoring the pain to finish the job. The hammer continues to connect, pushing his physical body to its absolute breaking point. With only 10 minutes left, he starts the fine-tuning of the blade. 3 minutes on the clock, he's almost there, finishing the final touches. 1 minute remains. Se-Hoon looks like he's finally done. The buzzer goes off, and the instructor yells for everyone to stop immediately. Se-Hoon exhales, his breath heavy from the pure exhaustion of the last 40 minutes. His hands are bruised and bloodied, but he made it just in time. A system notification pops up, confirming the completion of the five-colored fire blade and granting him the Artisan of Flame's skill. The sword is a masterpiece, appraised as a high-grade weapon. The stats for the blade appear, detailing how it reacts to mana and emits various colors. Assistant Han and the witnessing cadets were left utterly speechless. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the sword actually reached high grade. Se-Hoon casually tells him to check the info window if he's that surprised, while the professor looks on in silence. Han starts screaming that it's a clear pass, unable to contain his excitement. Professor Kim tells him to shut it, looking a bit annoyed by the outburst. Later, Se-Hoon is called into Professor Kim In-cheol's private office. The professor stares at him from across the desk, looking thoughtful. He asks Se-Hoon if he really thought that sword was worth turning in. Se-Hoon admits that for his current level, it was good enough. Professor Kim can tell the kid is still unsatisfied with the result. He bluntly tells Se-Hoon that this place isn't big enough for his talent, and he should withdraw his application. He explains that while Babel has a huge reputation, their refining department hasn't actually produced any real results lately. Se-Hoon listens calmly, but in his head, he already knows the truth about that place. He knows that in 8 years, Babel's refining department will be completely abolished for its low standards. And he knows that Vulcan Academy will be the one to rise and train the world's best blacksmiths. He looks the professor in the eye and tells him he's wrong about Vulcan being the best. Se-Hoon declares that the best will actually be Babel, because that's the place he's going to enter and change himself. Sunset hits the Academy Tower as Lee Se-Hoon's voice rings out, telling the professor he's got it all wrong. Se-Hoon points to himself with a smirk. He says the top spot won't belong to Vulcan Academy. His gaze sharpens. It'll belong to Babel, the school he's actually entering. Professor Kim In-cheol, a grizzled blacksmith with a blonde beard, just stares him down. Kim leans back, crossing his arms and asking if Se-Hoon really has the guts to aim for the top of the freshman class. Se-Hoon doesn't even blink when he says, of course. The professor stands up, wondering if the kid even knows the grueling process for picking Babel's top student. Se-Hoon lays it out like he's reading a script. The top 2 from every department take an extra exam to find one candidate, and then the final winner is picked from that group. He explains that Babel splits its students into 3 main faculties. You've got the combat faculty, the support faculty, and then Borsipa, the technical faculty where the crafters end up. Dozens of different departments are all tangled together under each faculty like tree roots. Making it to the top of a faculty means you've been evaluated as the best talent across all of them, earning respect from the whole academy. Kim clenches his hands, looking like he's struggling with some hard truths. He speaks up again, not as a teacher this time, but as a veteran blacksmith looking out for a junior. He tells Se-Hoon that even if he manages to climb to the top, succeeding as a blacksmith here is going to be near impossible. He straight up tells him to go to Vulcan Academy instead. He looks dead serious, genuinely believing he's pointing the kid toward the only path that actually has a future. Se-Hoon watches him, realizing Kim is a decent guy. He's putting a student's career ahead of his own faculty's numbers. But he tells the professor that the environment doesn't really matter. With a confident grin, Se-Hoon says that wherever he goes will become the best place because he's there. A small smirk finally breaks across Kim's face. He thinks the words are way past cocky and straight into arrogant territory. But for some reason, he doesn't hate the attitude. He holds out a massive scarred hand, telling Se-Hoon he'll be in his care. Se-Hoon reaches out and takes it, his bandaged hand disappearing into the veteran's grip. As they shake, a blue system window pops up. A connection has been established with Kim In-cheol, reaching level 1. Se-Hoon's eyes light up as the system starts extracting affinity directly from the professor. Blue sparks fly around his hand as a piece of raw mineral starts to manifest out of thin air. A jagged orange stone floats above his palm, pulled straight from the new bond he just formed. The system identifies it as fire-infused iron, a high-rank material that can store fire inside itself. Later that night, the city goes quiet under the streetlights. Back in his room, Se-Hoon sits on his bed, obsessing over the small chunk of iron. He looks at the glowing rock, thinking it's not a bad haul, but it's a bit disappointing that it's only this size. He thinks about his skill, affinity extraction, which lets him pull out minerals that didn't even exist before by quantifying his relationships. The problem is his connection level is still way too low for the skill to be truly useful yet. He checks his status window and sighs. Compared to the other freshmen heading to Babel, his stats are a total disaster. He lets out a long sigh. It's a lot to handle, but he figures it's a small price to pay for getting a second chance at life. He stares into the void, telling himself to keep his cool and not get impatient. There's still plenty of time to get ready before he has to take down the bastards from Pandemonium. He remembers the Pandemonium monsters, the things that didn't just threaten people, but the entire planet. Images of the 6 great demon gods flash in his mind, the ones who orchestrated the destruction of humanity. To stop them, he knows he can't afford to be picky about his methods. He decides he needs to find a memory-related tool or skill so he doesn't forget a single detail about the future. He sits there in the dark, checking his stats one last time. Step 1, getting into Babel, is officially done. Suddenly, something catches his eye as the system pings. He looks up, clearly surprised by whatever just popped up. A system message pops up. Se-Hoon's connection level has officially hit level 1. Along with that, he's unlocked a new skill, Affinity Imprint. A week passes, and we find Se-Hoon at the front gates of Babel Academy. He's wandering the halls, looking a little lost as he mutters to himself about being in the right place. He spots the sign for Refining Room 3 and breathes a sigh of relief. He finally found it. As he walks in, a voice calls him out by name. Se-Hoon takes his spot at a table, while the people in charge wait at the front. Someone is tapping their fingers impatiently, clearly annoyed by his arrival. It's Michael Barmut, the vice dean, and he's giving Se-Hoon a look that says he's already late. Se-Hoon tries to address the vice dean, but Michael just shuts him down. He lectures Se-Hoon, saying it's not about the clock, it's about having the right attitude. Se-Hoon realizes that the refining department isn't just struggling, it's also on the bad side of the higher-ups. He looks over at the other guy in the room, and finally gets why the professor wanted him to go to Vulcan Academy instead. This kid, Hans Barmut, is looking at him like he's absolute trash. The guy's eyes are practically glowing with elitism. Se-Hoon just stands there in silence, taking it all in. Hans lets out a scoff and turns his back, already done with him. Se-Hoon's just baffled. It's been ages since anyone's treated him like some wet-behind-the-ears brat. Suddenly, a woman's voice cuts through the tension, asking if everyone's already gathered. Both the boys turn toward the door to see who's coming in. Michael Barmut stands up, his voice losing its edge as he welcomes the dean. The woman walks past Se-Hoon with total confidence, heading for the head of the room. She casually apologizes for being late, her long red hair following her. This is Ryu Yunha, the dean of the entire Borsapa faculty. Se-Hoon's brain completely short-circuits. He knows exactly who this is from his past life. Se-Hoon is completely caught off guard when he sees who's walking into the room. He'd heard this person used to work at Babel, but he didn't think he'd see her here. Sitting before him is the dean herself, Ryu Yunha. In his past life, she was the S-Rank hero known as the Weapon Eater. Before he regressed, she was actually a regular customer of his for a very long time. But his memories of her aren't exactly pleasant. On the battlefield, in her final moments, she looked at him with eyes full of regret for having devoured the very weapons he had poured his heart and soul into. They were in the middle of a ruined city, with the rain pouring down around them. She was battered and broken, barely clinging to life. Se-Hoon could only stand there and watch, the weight of her words sinking in. Back then, she was a legend who had fallen, and he was just the blacksmith who had armed her. He suddenly snapped back to the present when his name is called. He quickly composes himself as the instructor looks his way. The instructor stands between the students, getting ready to lay out the rules for the final test. They've got exactly 90 minutes to prove they belong here. The goal is to craft a weapon that perfectly complements the sword they made in the last exam. But there's a catch to this particular challenge. They have to use a technique called alchemical smelting, which involves manipulating pure mana. The instructor gestures to the massive supply of materials they have at their disposal. There are rows of barrels and crates filled with various elemental ores. Up at the judges' table, Ryu Yunha sits beside Vice Dean Michael Barmut, waiting for the show to start. With a sharp command, the exam officially kicks off. Hans Barmut shoots a smug look over at Se-Hoon, clearly thinking he's already won. Se-Hoon just ignores him and ties on his apron, focused on the task at hand. He starts analyzing the ores, thinking about how to resonate the mana without it going berserk. Hans notices him hesitating and can't help but throw a jab about his low mana capacity. Se-Hoon looks up, wondering if this guy is actually talking to him or just likes the sound of his own voice. The instructor quickly steps in, calling out Hans for the disruption. He warns the kid to keep his mouth shut and focus on the exam. Hans backs off with a fake apology, while Se-Hoon makes a mental note of the name. It finally clicks. This annoying jerk is actually the judge's son, Michael and Hans Barmut. The resemblance is definitely there, and so is the shared arrogance. Se-Hoon just smirks, realizing why Hans acts like he owns the place. Hans is clearly riding high on his family name, thinking his pedigree makes him superior. He sees Se-Hoon as just some low-ranked commoner who doesn't stand a chance against a Barmut. Hans reaches into a bin, grabbing some high-quality ores to show off his skill. He picks out some expensive lazulite, confident that the outcome is already decided. The judges watch closely as the students make their first moves. The instructor notes that they've picked water attribute materials, which are notoriously difficult to smelt. Michael just smiles, claiming that the old ways of smelting are a thing of the past. The instructor looks skeptical, knowing how unpredictable elemental mana can be. But Michael is certain that his son can finish the entire synthesis in just 30 minutes. Hans starts the resonance, his mana already crackling with power. He's moving at a pace that seems impossible for a student. Even a second year wouldn't be able to pull off a synthesis in just 30 minutes. The instructor realizes the game is rigged. The time limit and materials are all designed to let Hans shine. It's clear that Michael went out of his way to set up the perfect stage for his son. Ryu Yunha watches silently, her eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Se-Hoon ignores the politics and focuses on the firestones in his hands. The judges look on, curious to see if the commoner can actually pull something off. Michael smirks, convinced that Se-Hoon is just acting tough to hide his lack of skill. Hans throws a sideways glance at his rival, wondering why he's so calm. He notices Se-Hoon has picked ores that completely contrast with his own. He thinks Se-Hoon is a total fool for trying to control the difficult Hwahang stones with such low mana. Hans feels like the victory is already in his pocket before the test even really started. But Se-Hoon's eyes sharpen as he prepares to break every rule of traditional alchemy. He triggers his unique skill, Affinity Engraving, causing the air to hum with power. Instead of using pure mana, he activates the Hwaham stones directly. He fuses the Hwaham iron straight into his right arm. A small, intense spark of fire ignites at his fingertips. In an instant, his entire arm is engulfed in a fierce, blazing flame. Hans is stunned, immediately dismissing it as nothing more than a cheap, flashy trick. The fire begins to spiral and dance around Se-Hoon's hand, perfectly under his control. He plunges his hands into the materials, the flames roaring as they begin the smelting. The ores start to glow and shift under the intense heat of his unique skill. Se-Hoon has a small smile on his face, enjoying the feeling of the crafting process. Everyone in the hall stops what they're doing to stare at the guy who just turned his arm into a torch. Michael thinks it's absolute suicide to try and resonate with the same attribute as the mineral. He's certain that the elemental mana is going to go berserk and blow Se-Hoon's arm off. He watches with a cruel grin, waiting for the inevitable disaster. But the flames don't explode. They flow with a precision that defies common sense. Se-Hoon was in a state of absolute focus. His concentration was so intense that he seemed like the protagonist in a silent, negative film painting, where all sound had simply vanished. The judges were absolutely stunned by the terrifying intensity of the firepower Se-Hoon was radiating. Out of the swirling fire, the shape of a weapon begins to materialize. Se-Hoon lets out a long breath as the heat starts to fade, signaling the end. He unequips the Hwaham iron as the system confirms the crafting is complete. The entire room goes dead silent as the judges stare in disbelief. He successfully created a fire attribute sheath named Hwajokcho. The weapon glows with a soft, warm light, looking like a piece of art. It's a rare rank item that not only stores fire mana, but also allows for a specialized skill called wildfire. Hans is shaking, unable to comprehend how Se-Hoon finished the entire synthesis in seconds. Drowning in shock from his rival's results, he lost his cool and made a suicidal move, trying to mimic our protagonist, Se-Hoon. He decided to fuse an additional attribute into the alchemy process, but he was clearly punching above his weight. The water attribute stones began to crackle with unstable energy. Realizing he's about to lose his grip, Hans looks down in pure terror. Michael stands up, shouting for his son to stop before he makes a fatal mistake. Hans is paralyzed with fear as the unstable mana stone begins to surge with electricity. The blinding light from the impending explosion reflects in his wide, panicking eyes. With a sharp metallic sound, the blue sphere shatters under the pressure. The entire room is swallowed by a violent blast of blue mana as the experiment ends in disaster. It's late afternoon at the smithing department, and the exam hall is dead quiet after the results. Scraps of metal and broken tools are scattered across the floor, leftovers from the intense testing. Hans Barmut, the vice dean's son, was left battered and bruised after a pathetic defeat. Lee Se-Hoon just stands there, completely unbothered by the heavy atmosphere in the room. Professor Kim In-cheol rubs his head in frustration, realizing how much of a mess this ranking is going to be. He sighs, thinking about the talent that might get wasted because of petty internal politics. Over on the side, Hans Barmut is a total wreck, barely able to keep himself together. His hand is shaking uncontrollably, his pride clearly shattered by the crushing defeat. Michael's mouth curls into a thin, displeased line as he prepares to step in. He starts messing with his tie, suggesting they should just void the whole exam and try again later. Kim isn't having it, arguing that they can't just ignore a completed test because things didn't go their way. Michael just smirks, accusing the professor of caring more about grades than the well-being of his students. Kim stares back, clearly exhausted by the blatant favoritism Michael is showing his family. The vice department head steps forward, ready to flex his authority over the situation. He slams his point home, claiming the record for resonance speed is 5 minutes, making Se-Hoon's result a physical impossibility. He points a finger at Se-Hoon, declaring that there's no way a brand new student could pull off something like that. Se-Hoon just watches him rant, knowing the guy's common sense is decades behind his own knowledge. He reflects on how traditional alchemy forging usually just forces life into the ore, rather than finding its core. Michael shows off a simple resonance, convinced that he's the ultimate authority on how things should work. Se-Hoon doesn't even flinch, knowing his new, method will eventually become the global standard anyway. He decides it's not worth explaining high-level techniques to some old guy who just likes to bark threats. Michael takes his silence as a confession, laughing about how Se-Hoon clearly used a dirty trick to cheat. He looks at the red katana, refusing to believe a nobody freshman could craft a rare-grade weapon like this. Se-Hoon's eyes narrow as the guy's arrogance starts to get on his nerves. Suddenly, a voice from the side agrees that the whole situation doesn't make any sense. Michael beams, thinking the department head is finally taking his side to disqualify the cheater. But he's left confused when she just walks right past him without a second glance. The red-headed department head stops right in front of the table, her eyes fixed on Se-Hoon's work. She slowly reaches out and picks up the sword, her hands trembling slightly. She stares at the blade in awe, whispering about how unbelievable the craftsmanship is. Then the drooling starts. She's looking at that sword like it's a 5-course meal. She points at Se-Hoon, catching him completely off guard with her sudden intensity. She goes full fanatic, begging him for just one bite, or at least a quick lick of the blade. The professors just stand there in stunned silence, wondering if their boss has finally lost it. She's practically vibrating with excitement, making a total scene in front of everyone. The whole mood of the room just evaporates, leaving the staff completely drained by her weirdness. Later that afternoon, the city is glowing under the sunset as students head home. Se-Hoon walks through downtown alone, his mind already moving on to his next move. He looks at the weapon in his hand, thinking the overall build is okay, but the fine-tuning is still a bit amateur. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the stress of the day fade away. He can't help but chuckle at the memory of Michael Barmut's face, turning red with rage. But then he pauses. The name Barmut is starting to ring a very specific, unpleasant bell from his past life. Barmut, the name kept echoing in his head, pulling up memories from his previous life. Back then, one of his comrades had bought a cheap piece of junk while working as a chore boy at Babel, only for it to suddenly explode right in her hands. That explosion left her with severe mana burns and a long scar across her face, all because of that bastard's trash craftsmanship. Se-Hoon stops in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as the pieces of the puzzle finally click together. The realization hits him like a physical blow as he stands there on the sidewalk. The blacksmith who left the legendary mad dog, Liu's Valent, with lifelong trauma was a Barmut. He wonders if Hans Barmut, the kid from the exam, is the one destined to become that incompetent smith. Se-Hoon had originally planned to find the 3 dogs and help them turn over a new leaf. But for Liu's, he might not need to go that far. A cold smirk plays on his lips as he realizes he can solve the problem at its source. If he can just keep the Barmut family in check now, he can prevent the mad dog from ever going astray. Meanwhile, inside the Borsapa faculty meeting room, the atmosphere is incredibly tense. The other professors are absolutely losing it, unable to believe Se-Hoon was named the top student of the department. They look at the red-headed department head in disbelief, questioning if she's actually serious about this choice. She just stares them down, asking if anyone is actually brave enough to oppose her decision. One professor stammers out that it's more of a piece of advice than outright opposition. Michael tried to play it polite, pointing out that she was still new to the job and might want to think twice about her decision. She remains silent, her sharp eyes scanning the room as the murmurs of doubt grow louder. The room is filled with whispers about how, even if the weapon was impressive, the decision seems rushed. Professor Kim Incheol steps in to defend the choice, mentioning that none of them have actually seen the fire-red herb Se-Hoon used. Other professors are still skeptical, doubting that a single student could really show that much potential. Kim argues that even though the weapon was technically unfinished, its raw potential is what makes it so promising. The department head's mouth twitches into a slight grin as she prepares her final argument. She tells them that if they still can't accept her decision after seeing the top student demonstration, she'll officially resign from her position as the head of the department. Fast forward to the big event. The announcer talks about how the Tower of Heroes was gifted to humanity 54 years ago. He recounts the dark history when the underworld unleashed the swamp of pandemonium, threatening to corrupt all life. From that chaos, Babel was born, the greatest academy in history, rising from the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Emperor Ludwig Schubert, known as the Emperor of Ascension, stands tall before the massive crowd. He urges the new students to march forward, carrying the heavy burden of being the next generation of heroes. He finishes his speech by reminding them of their duty to ascend Babel and protect the world. Se-Hoon watches from the sidelines, looking at the legendary Emperor Ludwig Schubert with a complicated expression. He thinks to himself that the guy actually looks decent, even though he knows the Emperor isn't all he's cracked up to be. The announcer then calls for the demonstration by this year's top incoming cadets to begin. One by one, the top representatives of each faculty step up onto the grand stage. Se-Hoon walks forward, thinking about how in his past life he never understood why these Elites acted so high and mighty. The crowd roars with excitement as the top cadets stand ready for the show to start. Se-Hoon stands among them, realizing he finally gets why the atmosphere is so charged with expectation. The announcer introduces the target for the demonstration with a dramatic flourish. A massive combat-type automaton emerges, its red ocular sensor glowing with a menacing light. It's a Model 9 automaton, a powerful golem produced by the famous marionette factory. Se-Hoon analyzes the machine, noting its lack of weapons and concluding it's a brawler-type model. The announcer shouts for the first demonstration to begin, starting with the combat faculty. The announcer's voice booms across the arena, introducing the first representative, Jake Myers, the top cadet of the combat faculty, Acklecuff. The massive stage is set for a demonstration of power that will set the tone for the entire incoming class. Se-Hoon watches intently, recognizing the boy as the third son of the prestigious Myers family, an oddball who chose martial arts over his family's traditional swordsmanship. Jake settles into a confident fighting stance, his orange eyes gleaming with the thrill of the upcoming spar. Opposite him, the Model 9 automaton's red ocular sensor flares to life, locking onto its target. With a theatrical shout from the announcer, the battle officially begins. The automaton struck first, its fist tearing through the air with a sharp, piercing whistle. In a blurred flash of motion, the automaton closed the gap, its movements incredibly fluid and precise. The advanced machine launched a powerful strike directly at the young man, creating a flawless line of attack, but he managed to tilt his body just in time to evade it. The automaton followed up with a relentless barrage of attacks, each blow more devastating than the last. Yet not a single one managed to find its mark. Jake skillfully slid backward with a stylish spin, looking completely nonchalant as if he were just getting started with a little warm-up. With a cocky smirk, he makes it clear that he's just getting started. Jake Myers, a blonde cadet from the combat faculty, charges toward a training automaton. He lets out a roar, putting all his momentum into a single strike. His fist slams into the machine's chest, buckling the heavy plating. The other cadets in the audience watch in stunned silence. Another crushing blow connects with a thunderous impact. Watching from the sidelines, Se-Hoon remembers this guy as a tragic genius who died young in his past life. The assault is a blur of power. Talent like this only shows up once a decade. The regressor swallows hard, wondering why someone this gifted never made it past A-rank. Jake doesn't slow down, his eyes glowing with intensity as he prepares a final hit. With one last explosion of force, the automaton is completely obliterated. And just as we finished reading that line, the heads of the two automatons were sent flying and spinning across the stage, their armor plating shattering from the impact. The machine hits the ground hard, its once menacing red eye fading as its systems shut down. The announcer is left momentarily speechless by the sheer efficiency of the takedown. The crowd erupts into cheers as the announcer praises Jake for defeating a C-rank level threat in a single breath. Jake waves casually to the audience, soaking in the adulation as if it were his birthright. Se-Hoon notes that Jake has set an incredibly high bar, leaving the next representative under immense pressure. Next up is the top representative of the support faculty, the enigmatic Erika Inao. Se-Hoon watches the black-haired girl walk forward, knowing better than anyone that pressure is the last thing she'd ever feel. She is the eldest daughter of the Inao family, one of the three most powerful noble houses in Japan. In his past life, she was a legendary S-rank hero who wielded a mythic-grade weapon with terrifying grace. But that legend ended in tragedy when she was corrupted into a fiend and eventually executed by her own kin. Recognizing her destiny for ruin, Se-Hoon decides it's best to keep his distance from her in this life. Suddenly, Erika pauses and looks directly at Se-Hoon, catching him off guard. He brushes it off, wondering if he was just imagining her gaze amidst the sea of people. The announcer introduces her challenge, an armored Model 9 with significantly boosted defensive capabilities. Erika stands motionless before the towering machine, her expression unreadable. She slowly lifts a Victorian-style birdcage, within which sits a single pitch-black crow. Her eye flares with a cold blue light as she releases the bird with a single quiet command. The crow takes flight, its shriek echoing through the arena like a dark omen. Her crow circles above, overlooking the entire arena, while below the tiny girl stands face to face with the massive machine, looking incredibly fragile yet eerily calm. Se-Hoon watches, confused by her choice of a familiar for such a heavy-duty demonstration. As the crow soars across the blazing sun, it begins to radiate an intense, mystical blue light. Sensing the threat, the automaton shifts into a full defensive stance, raising its heavy shield arms. Se-Hoon doubts the small bird can penetrate such thick plating, especially in a purely defensive configuration. A faint, knowing smile touches Erika's lips as the mana around the crow begins to coalesce. Ethereal light begins to condense around the crow's wings and legs, forging them into cold, lethal metal right before the audience's eyes. From the mana emerges a massive, armored spirit form with glowing blue eyes. The familiar takes on its true, terrifying shape, a colossal winged beast of pure energy. It slams into the automaton with the force of a falling meteor, dark feathers scattering everywhere. A blinding explosion of mana and smoke erupts, completely obscuring the stage as the ground trembles. Se-Hoon stares in disbelief as the dust settles on the arena floor. The Model 9 automaton stands frozen, a gaping, smoldering hole torn straight through its heavy chest armor. Electricity crackles around the ruin of the machine, showing the sheer destructive force of Erica's familiar. As the ethereal energy dissipates, the crow flies back through the lingering smoke toward its master. Erica calmly retrieves the bird, her expression as cold and unchanging as the bird's glowing eyes. The announcer's voice reaches a fever pitch, screaming about the incredible feat of piercing a S-Rank defense with a single strike as the crowd erupts in cheers. Se-Hoon wipes a bead of sweat from his brow, realizing that following such a display is going to be a nightmare. Despite the overwhelming atmosphere, he grips his sheathed weapon and begins the long walk toward the center of the stage. The announcer kicks things off by introducing Lee Se-Hoon as the top student of the engineering faculty. Up in the VIP booth, Ludwig Schubert watches the arena closely. Ludwig is impressed by this year's crop of freshmen. It's been a while since the refining department produced a top student, and he hopes the kid can handle the heat. Sitting beside him, Ryu Yunha is confident Se-Hoon will be just fine. The crowd is already hyped, wondering if Se-Hoon can actually top the crazy performances from Jake and Erica. Se-Hoon walks out onto the floor, looking completely calm as he reaches for his sword. Holographic displays pop up, showing off his rare-grade 5-colored fire blade and fire-infused scabbard. The students in the stands are skeptical. They can't believe the refining department actually turned out a rare-grade weapon. Compared to what they've seen from other departments, Se-Hoon's gear looks way too plain to be anything special. Michael Barmut watches with a smug grin, already convinced that Se-Hoon is about to crash and burn. In his mind, he was already picturing his son seizing the top spot the moment this piece of trash finishes his pathetic performance. Yunha keeps her eyes fixed on the boy, waiting to see if there's more to his creation than meets the eye. The announcer starts setting up a D-rank target, but Se-Hoon immediately shuts him down. He wants something better. He calmly requests they bring out a Model 8 automaton and equip it with extra armor. The announcer freezes mid-sentence, completely caught off guard by the demand. A Model 8 is meant to withstand B-rank hero attacks. Piling armor on top of that is basically asking for a suicide mission. He stammers into the mic, sweating as he tries to process the insane request. The announcer starts panicking, worried Se-Hoon is just trying to sabotage the entire demonstration on short notice. But instructor Kim Incheol appears out of nowhere, hauling the exact bot Se-Hoon asked for. The massive armored machine rolls onto the stage, leaving the announcer speechless. The announcer tries to tell Kim he can't just do that, but the instructor isn't listening. Ludwig watches the scene unfold, intrigued by the sudden change in the demonstration stakes. Kim gives Se-Hoon a simple command: go wild. Se-Hoon stood his ground, facing the metal giant without flinching, and silently thanked his teacher. Seeing no other choice, the announcer raises his hand and calls for the start of the duel. The crowd erupts as the real show finally begins. Kim folds his arms and leans back, ready to see what his student can really do. Yunha leans forward, her eyes narrowing as she focuses on the center of the arena. Se-Hoon cracks a small smile. He's more than ready to live up to the crowd's expectations. He takes a low stance and draws the blade just an inch out of its scabbard. With a sudden flash, multicolored flames burst forth, engulfing the blade in a brilliant light. He settled into his stance, ready to unleash a strike at a moment's notice. Across from him stood the automaton, the heaviest challenge yet, far outclassing what the other two top students had faced. The students are losing their minds at the spectacle, unable to believe a freshman is pulling this off. Hans just scoffs, dismissing the entire thing as nothing but flashy eye candy. He's convinced a brat with barely any mana can't actually put any weight behind a hit. Se-Hoon knows the flames in his blade are volatile, but he's got a plan to harness that chaos. He uses his Artisan of Flame skill to force-feed the crimson fire directly into the scabbard. His eye glows with a sharp light as the injection is completed. The armored automaton braces itself, its internal systems flaring as it recognizes the threat. It's time for Se-Hoon to unleash wildfire. He swings his blade, and the arena is instantly consumed by a massive wave of energy. The compressed mana inside the scabbard detonates, forcing Jake and the other students to shield their eyes from the blast. The explosion hits the armored bot dead on, tearing through its defenses like they were made of paper. The energy from the blade reached its absolute peak, triggering a colossal, earth-shattering wave that completely annihilated both the target and the arena floor. Up in the stands, the proctors were frozen in shock. Even Michael was left speechless, completely paralyzed by the sheer, raw power of that strike. The announcer is having a complete meltdown. He's never seen a freshman do this much property damage in a mid-term evaluation. As the dust begins to settle, Se-Hoon stands alone in the middle of the scorched arena. He slowly sheathes his blade, the heat still radiating from the metal. He lets out a small breath, looking remarkably calm despite the chaos he just unleashed. Looking down at the massive trench carved into the floor, he wonders if he might have gone a bit too far with the demonstration. The announcer is literally shaking as he tries to find the words to end the evaluation. He calls for the construction support team to fix the hall immediately. Evaluation is over, and Se-Hoon has set a new record for destruction. A while later, the click of heels echoes down the hallway toward a private office. Se-Hoon is waiting inside, sitting on a sofa with his arms crossed while he waits for the faculty's verdict. Ryu Yunha walks in, apologizing for the wait. She was busy supervising the cleanup of the massive mess he made in the arena. Se-Hoon stands up and rubs the back of his neck, offering his own apology for wrecking the main hall. Yunha just stares at him. She's not thinking about the damage. She's focused on the quality of his work. He starts to get a little nervous, asking if she called him in just to give him a lecture about the property damage. She waves it off immediately, telling him that's not the reason she brought him here at all. Suddenly, a strange gurgling sound comes from her, and she looks incredibly flustered as she struggles to stay professional. Se-Hoon can only stare in confusion at the sudden, weird shift in the atmosphere. She clears her throat and tries to regain her composure, looking a bit embarrassed by her own reaction. She gets straight to the point, looking Se-Hoon in the eye with an intense, desperate gaze. She offers him 10 times the market price for both the blade and the scabbard. She has to have them for herself. Se-Hoon is completely stunned. He didn't expect the head of faculty to try and buy a student's gear right off him. Just then, a system notification pings. He's officially established an affinity with Ryu Yunha. Ryu Yunha is speechless. Se-Hoon's managed to link up with her already, establishing a level 1 connection. Even Se-Hoon's a bit shocked. Back before he regressed, he had to practically beg her just to get this far. He puts on a polite face and thanks her, but inside he's grinning. This is a massive win. He doesn't waste time and starts an affinity extraction, his hands glowing with a cold blue light. Lightning crackles between them as he pulls something valuable directly from the target. He've done it. He's obtained affinity iron, a top-tier metal that literally melts other iron to get stronger. A glowing red crystal forms in his hand, humming with power. Ryu Yunha is already itching to get her hands on it, asking if he's selling. Se-Hoon just gives her a blank no. She's about to push him on it when a knock at the door stops her. It's Kim In-cheol. The instructor walks in and tells them the chairman wants to see the boy for the presentation ceremony right now. Kim In-cheol asks to take Se-Hoon along, leaving Ryu Yunha looking a little frustrated. She doesn't have much of a choice, so she just tells them she understands. Se-Hoon gives her a little bow and promises to see her later as he follows the instructor. Ryu Yunha stands there in silence, watching the talented kid walk out of her office. They head over to the Marduk estate, a massive, castle-like building that serves as the heart of the academy. Kim In-cheol leads Se-Hoon through the luxurious halls, with light pouring in from the massive windows. The instructor tells him to be on his best behavior. You don't want to get on the bad side of the man at the top. Apparently, the boss is feeling generous today, since he's overlooking the fact that Se-Hoon blew up the auditorium. Se-Hoon isn't worried at all. He just tells the instructor not to sweat it as he prepares to meet the legend. They enter the massive office, which looks more like a grand library than a workspace. This is the man himself, Ludwig Schubert, the chairman and a legendary figure known as the Emperor of Ascension. Se-Hoon remembers him as a hero who supposedly died fighting one of the 6 great demon gods in the past. Looking at him now, Se-Hoon can feel the weight of an actual apex climber. Ludwig opens his eyes and admits that the weapons Se-Hoon showed off earlier were actually pretty interesting. He says he's looking forward to what the kid does in the future. Se-Hoon stays calm, knowing he took a huge risk by throwing all his best materials into those armaments. As a reward for all that talent and effort, the chairman decides to give him 2 special gifts. Se-Hoon's ears perk up at that. He's already got a wish list ready. He asks for something that can level up both his magic power and his memory. Ludwig hums and starts summoning the items, a golden seal appearing in front of Se-Hoon. The magic manifests into the first reward. It's heavy dark ink, a hero-grade fragment that absorbs magic from anything it touches. Then comes the Dream Ivory, a rare fang from a dream-eating beast that lets you cross into the illusory realm. Se-Hoon is genuinely impressed. The ink is rare, but that ivory is a nightmare to find. He cracks a smile. He might not be able to use them perfectly yet, but he's already got a plan. Ludwig watches him, curious if the gifts are enough for him. Se-Hoon takes his loot and heads out, looking like he just won the lottery. He strolls through the estate courtyard, feeling pretty good about himself. Back in the office, a voice from the shadows finds it unusual that Ludwig would be so generous to a cadet. Ludwig just shrugs it off. He only gave the rewards because the kid actually has the capacity to use them. He explains that the boy has enough depth to make even a veteran like him take notice. Ludwig's eye narrows, thinking about how this kid feels more like an old soul than a teenager. Even a legend like the chairman can't fully grasp just how much potential is hidden inside Se-Hoon. Back at the academy, the sun is shining on the engineering faculty building as a new day of classes begins. Inside the lecture hall, students are settled in, but the mood is about to shift when the top cadet walks in. Hans Barmut is busy acting like a big shot, telling his buddies he's too busy for lunch because he's got plans with Howard. One of the guys mentions Howard is the top third-year cadet, but Hans gets a sudden chill when he spots Se-Hoon walking by. Hans keeps the act up, claiming their families are super close, and he's just getting some insider advice on academy life. Suddenly, Se-Hoon swings the door open and strides in, instantly shattering the sycophantic atmosphere Hans Barmut and his lackeys were creating. There's an intensity in his eyes that feels like it could cut through stone. The entire room goes quiet as he makes his way down the aisle without saying a word. Up close, those glowing eyes are enough to make anyone second-guess themselves. Hans is definitely feeling it. He's sweating bullets and wondering what's up with that terrifying look. Se-Hoon doesn't say a word. He just figures the guy finally knows who's really in charge. Hans is fuming, though. He can't stand being intimidated by someone he considers a nobody with no background. The classroom door swings open, and instructor Kim In-cheol walks in, ordering everyone to take their seats. He gets straight to business, standing at the front of the room ready to start the lesson. Since it's the first class, he wants to kick things off with some self-introductions. He brings out a box of projection alloy, a special material for their first test. He explains that it's dozens of times more sensitive to magic than your average ore. To prove it, he pumps some magic into a piece, and it starts glowing with a fierce heat. In an instant, he manifests a massive, pitch-black blade right out of thin air. The students are blown away. Se-Hoon realizes that this guy isn't a top 100 artisan for nothing. But there's a catch to using such sensitive material. The manifested weapon shatters easily, showing just how unstable it can be. The instructor explains that it reflects parts of your personality you might not even realize you have. These creations are called avatars, and they're essentially a snapshot of the creator's soul. He tells them to give it there all since their work will be displayed in the main building for a week. Hans is the first to jump at the chance, grabbing a piece of alloy that probably cost a fortune. He channels his magic and creates a fancy, gold-trimmed rapier that looks pretty impressive to the crowd. The other students are floored, but Se-Hoon isn't buying it. He thinks the guy is missing the most important talent. Then lastly, the instructor calls on Lee Se-Hoon to step up. He picks up a piece and looks at his own reflection. He's already the top cadet, so there's no point in playing small anymore. He starts pouring his magic in, and a violent red flame begins to swirl around the alloy. He decides it's time to stop holding back and just go all out. Out of nowhere, a massive energy blast detonated, swallowing the hall in a brilliant light. Tremors shook the whole academy, leaving everyone paralyzed with confusion as they struggled to process the source of such a terrifying explosion. A massive crowd has gathered around the latest exhibition. The students can't stop talking about it. A freshman pulling off something on this level is unheard of. Most of them are just standing there in disbelief. The piece is a statistical anomaly. It actually absorbed 19 surrounding projection alloys during production. Some are trying to brush it off as a lucky coincidence, but the Academy is officially recognizing it as proof of Lee Se-Hoon's talent. Erika now watches the crowd with her own thoughts on the matter. Her companion agrees that the alloys provided weren't enough to truly measure Se-Hoon's depth. The weapon itself is a bizarre, powerful fusion that defies standard logic. Cut to the workshop, where the sound of heavy hammering rings out. Lee Se-Hoon is drenched in sweat, completely locked into his work. He's hitting the metal with perfect precision, not missing a single beat. The instructor calls for the end of class, and the other students start packing up. Se-Hoon doesn't stop, pushing his younger body as hard as he possibly can. He looks over the blades on the table, still feeling like something is missing. He raises the hammer again, his focus sharpening until his eyes practically glow. An assistant instructor walks over to check on him. He tells Se-Hoon to take it easy. They need this next piece to be delivered, not broken. He explains that the Academy's budget relies on the sale of these student-made weapons. Seeing the kid's frustration, He asks if the issue is his physical strength or his mana. Se-Hoon wipes his face and admits that right now, it's definitely his body holding him back. He wants to work with heavyweight rock, but he just doesn't have the stamina to handle it yet. The assistant instructor pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Why don't you try a different approach?" He suggests that using magic buffs might be a lot faster than just waiting for his muscles to grow. Se-Hoon realizes he's been thinking like a purist. In his past life, he never bothered with magical assistance, but now he sees the potential. Buffs could bridge the gap and let him smelt high-tier ores immediately. As he started to head out, he paused to cast a lingering look at the assistant instructor's work. He casually mentions the guy is wasting too much mana and needs to focus his strikes on a single point. The instructor is left completely speechless. He watches the freshman walk away, stunned that a student just gave him technical advice. Se-Hoon steps out into the afternoon light, ready to start his new plan. Babel Academy is pretty open about letting cadets take classes from other departments. He boards the train, keeping in mind that the freedom comes with the risk of expulsion if he fails. The automated voice announces the next stop, the Department of Shamanism. Se-Hoon steps onto the platform, looking for the shortcuts he needs. He runs right into Erica now and her group of followers. One of the guys guarding her immediately gets aggressive and tells Se-Hoon to move. Se-Hoon doesn't budge, telling them that they should be the ones getting out of his way. The tension spikes instantly as the guy gets ready to start a fight. Erica steps in and asks Se-Hoon where he's going in such a hurry. He tells her he's here to take a minor in shamanism, leaving the guys behind her confused. Erica offers to be his guide herself. She tells her group to head to their gathering without her, leaving them baffled as she walks off with Se-Hoon. Erica's followers are desperate to get her to a seniors gathering, but she shuts them down instantly, making it clear she's not interested. She keeps walking with Se-Hoon, leaving the rest of her group standing there. She asks him what exactly he's looking for in a minor. Se-Hoon tells her he's after buffs, which catches her off guard. He explains that he needs a physical boost that won't mess with his smelting process. Erica suggests looking into barrier techniques, though Se-Hoon thinks those are only for defense. She pulls out a special envelope to prove her point. She explains that barrier magic is far more versatile than he thinks. She hands him the invitation and tells him to try and tear it open. Se-Hoon gives it a shot, but the magical chains holding it shut won't budge. Erica explains the trick. The barrier is designed to get harder the more force you apply to it. Se-Hoon realizes that kind of reactive control would be perfect for high-level smelting. She offers to hook him up with a specialized professor from her family's branch. But before she can even finish her offer, the sound of the seal cracking rings out. Erica's jaw practically hits the floor. She can't believe he managed to decipher and dismantle her family's signature barrier in seconds. Se-Hoon just shrugs it off and thanks her for the tip, realizing barrier magic is definitely worth his time. He tells her he's going to register now and suggests she join her friends for lunch. Her followers come racing back to her side, panicked that something might have happened. They find the shredded, noblesse, invitation scattered on the ground. Erica is left in a daze, staring at the pieces of the invitation she personally gave him. Soon after, they arrive at the testing grounds for the Department of Sorcery. The other students are already whispering about why a top student like Erica is hanging out with some random guy. Se-Hoon notices the gossip, but he's more amused by it than anything. Erica warns him that the department doesn't just let anyone in. He has to pass a screening test first. They step into a dense forest that serves as the testing area. Other applicants are already wandering around, looking completely lost. Se-Hoon looks around, wondering if they're really supposed to be playing treasure hunt. He's already starting to find the whole process a little tedious. Suddenly, his foot triggered a hidden trap, causing a violent surge of magical energy to erupt into the air. The magical shards suddenly shattered and scattered in every direction, revealing two men standing right there. In a surprising turn of events, the proctor announced that he had passed, even though Se-Hoon was still processing what the hell had just happened. Stunned, Se-Hoon responded with a bewildered, "Excuse me," his face literally covered in question marks. Flashback to a few hours earlier. Professor Robert Perry watched from his office, intrigued by the news that Erica was showing a keen interest in a mere freshman. An assistant brings him a phone to show him the latest gossip. It's a photo of the two of them walking together. Perry is confused why a genius like her would even bother with a beginner's course. He's also stressed out because her presence has caused the number of applicants to triple this year. On top of that, he's received a special request regarding a certain young master now. To sort through the massive crowd, he decides to introduce a much tougher test using the labyrinth of illusory soul. It's a sensory-twisting barrier designed to make even the most confident students lose their way. Perry knows that anyone who doesn't understand the fundamentals of sorcery won't even realize they're trapped until it's too late. Professor Robert Perry is genuinely shocked that Se-Hoon navigated the labyrinth relying solely on his instincts. He can't help but sweat as he processes how impressive that feat actually is. Regaining his composure, Perry announces that the group has officially passed the first test. A red-haired student immediately steps forward, eager to be the first to take the next challenge. He's desperate to catch Erica's eye and thinks this is the perfect moment to prove his worth. Perry sets the stage for the second test. They must dismantle a complex barrier while keeping its structure intact. The student begins his attempt on the spiderweb-type barrier, which is powered by a magical spider at its core. The barrier is designed to be tricky. The spider flees through the web, and as long as it's alive, the threads regenerate infinitely. The boy struggles to keep up, wondering if he simply doesn't have enough mana to pin the core down. He decides to stop being careful and tries to overwhelm the spider with raw speed. He finally manages to finish, and Perry records his time at 2 minutes and 23 seconds. It's a respectable score, but the student is clearly drained from the effort. A montage follows of several other students failing the task, their frustration mounting as they're called out one by one. Perry dismisses the lot of them, assigning them all to the beginner-level classes. The professor then calls up the next applicant, the prodigy herself, Erica Inao. Perry gives her the signal to begin, eager to see how the top student of the faculty handles it. Erica moves with effortless grace, her silhouette glowing as she approaches the magical web. She touches the barrier with a light tap, sending precise ripples through the entire sorcery formula. The other students are left gaping, unable to fathom how she can move so incredibly fast. With a final surgical strike, she completely dismantles the core and causes the entire barrier to collapse. Everyone watches in awe, reminded why she holds the title of the faculty's top student. Perry stops the clock at a staggering 22 seconds, noting that while she deviated from the standard method, it was still a masterful display. Finally, the moment everyone has been waiting for arrives, as Perry calls Se-Hoon to the center. Se-Hoon stares at the web, unimpressed by the complexity that had stumped so many others. He settles into a crouch, closely observing the way the mana flows through the threads. The red-haired student and his peers whisper among themselves, wondering why he's just sitting there instead of starting. To Se-Hoon, the logic of the barrier feels remarkably similar to the properties of heavyweight ore. He knows that to smelt such ore, one must balance all stimuli and inject them simultaneously to prevent it from repairing itself. Perry watches with growing confusion, unable to understand what the boy is waiting for. Erica, however, tells the professor to just be patient and let Se-Hoon work at his own pace. Perry can't help but feel skeptical about Se-Hoon's unusual approach. Se-Hoon wonders if he can apply his smelting logic here to hold on to the accumulated stimuli within the barrier. No sooner thought than done. He channeled a surge of energy into the barrier, letting it race through the threads like wildfire before striking the spider at its core. There was no blinding pillar of light, nor any grand spectacle to draw the crowd. Instead, Se-Hoon calmly dismantled the barrier at his own pace, leaving everyone in a tense, suffocating silence as they watched his every move. As the light fades, Se-Hoon stands up calmly, simply stating that he's finished. He realizes that the logic he just uncovered will allow him to finally refine the difficult heavyweight ore. He steps away from the scorched earth where the barrier once stood, leaving nothing but smoke behind. He walks back toward the group with his hands in his pockets, looking like he hasn't broken a sweat. The assistant instructor stared at his stopwatch in utter confusion. Compared to Erica's 22 seconds, Se-Hoon's 7 minutes and 45 seconds felt like a complete joke. But to Perry, the time on the clock is completely irrelevant. He realizes Se-Hoon didn't just break the barrier. He invented an entirely new formula to systematically erase it. Erica watches him walk away, her interest in this unusual freshman deepening even further. Watching Se-Hoon's back as he walks away, Perry shudders at the thought of what kind of legendary items the boy will create once he successfully blends the world of sorcery with his peerless smelting skill. Se-Hoon isn't wasting any time, submitting an application for intermediate smelting using high-grade materials. The staff at the Babel Administrative Office wonders how many people will actually volunteer to supervise a freshman. Turns out the interest is insane. Notifications are flooding in as professors scramble for a chance to watch him work. On the other hand, not a single person from Michael Barmut's faction sent a response, likely because they're still salty about Se-Hoon taking the top spot. Suddenly, another notification pings, stopping the administrator in his tracks. His jaw practically hits the floor when he sees who just signed up. Se-Hoon is already geared up in the forge, waiting for his supervisor to arrive. It's none other than Ryu Yunha, the department head, who decided she needed to verify his skills in person. Seeing as the big boss herself is here, Se-Hoon realizes he's going to have to give this everything he's got. He starts step 1 of the smelting process using a dark, heavy stone. He's going with the dark veil method, which is notorious for being the most difficult way to handle this material. The first move involves placing the stone in a space completely devoid of any light. As the stone begins to liquefy like water, he has to manually separate every single impurity using nothing but mana. It might sound simple, but Se-Hoon is essentially restructuring matter on the fly. Watching him work, even Yoonha can't hide her surprise at how precise his control is. He manages to reduce the stone to a quarter of its original size, maximizing its purity for the best possible performance. Now it's time for step 2. Se-Hoon begins channeling intense red flames, and the sheer power of it catches the department head off guard. He carefully filters his mana through the fire, picking out specific sparks needed for the next phase. These stabilized flames are known as Guardian Wildfire, capable of maintaining a perfect, consistent temperature. Step 3 begins. Se-Hoon coats his hammer in that wildfire and starts striking the stone without a single second of rest. Yoonha watches him sweat, realizing just how much he must have pushed himself to reach this level of mastery. He slams the hammer down, and a massive burst of green energy erupts from the forge. Outside, the sun is already setting, as the grueling process continues long into the evening. It's been hours, and even the legendary department head is starting to lose the battle with sleep. She starts dozing off, while the rhythmic sound of the hammer keeps echoing through the room. 4 full hours have passed, and Se-Hoon's arm is finally starting to give out from the sheer physical strain. But the stone has reached its limit, absorbing the flames until its very properties begin to warp. The distortion finally stops, signaling that the most difficult part is over. Using a pair of tongs, Se-Hoon carefully moves the processed stone over to be melted down once more. He starts pouring the liquid into a pre-prepared mold, but Yoonha is confused as to why he's casting instead of forging. She watches intently, realizing he's doing something completely unconventional. It's the final step. Se-Hoon is using a barrier-breaking formula to slow the cooling process just enough to weave a mana circuit inside. Within the mold, the mana circuit glows as it perfectly integrates into the new equipment. The outer shell shatters as the material solidifies. A system message pops up, confirming the completion of the Dark Spider bracelet. Se-Hoon is completely wiped out, but he's rewarded with a new D-rank skill, Black Spirit Thread. The rare-grade bracelet is impressive, capable of absorbing mana to increase its weight and allowing for a specific gravity skill. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, he can't help but grin. It's a total success. Just as the tension breaks, a loud growl echoes through the forge. Yoonha turns bright red, realization hitting her that she's actually hungry after watching him work for so long. Se-Hoon just takes a deep breath, letting the exhaustion finally wash over him. Yoonha is clearly impressed, noting a resonance phenomenon in the finished piece. Se-Hoon just sits there looking like he's been through a war, barely able to muster a simple yes. He looks over the bracelets, knowing they're not his strongest work yet, but they're perfect for building a set effect. He offers her the mana-saturated residues from the process, apologizing for not having a full piece of gear for her yet. Se-Hoon watches intently to see her reaction. She takes a bite and finds it surprisingly edible, which catches him off guard. Yoonha describes the flavor as something like tempura crumbs, which is a weirdly specific compliment. Se-Hoon realizes he might be getting a bit too good at catering to the department head's specific tastes. Still, he's glad she's happy, knowing this is the fastest way to raise his affinity with her. Yoonha keeps eating, admitting it's a bit of a shame to snack while looking at high-quality items like these. She shifts the topic to his more valuable materials, asking when he plans on processing the rare sword and herb. When Se-Hoon says he has no intention of selling them, Yoonha looks genuinely surprised. He explains he's saving them for class and jokes that hunger is the best seasoning. The remark actually makes Yoonha blush as she looks forward to what he'll create next. She checks if he's officially done for the night, and he confirms the smelting is complete. Yoonha suggests heading out and letting the staff clean up the mess, which is music to Se-Hoon's exhausted ears. But just as he's relaxing, something catches him by surprise. Before he can react, Yoonha is right there in his personal space. She asks if he's doing okay, and Se-Hoon admits he definitely overdid it with the stamina distribution. She offers to take him back to his room personally, but first, she has a weird question about whether he's afraid of heights. He barely starts to answer when things take a turn. Without warning, Yoonha scoops him up bridal style, leaving Se-Hoon completely stunned. She doesn't use the door, instead opting for a more direct exit through the window. They plummet out of the building, Yoonha seemingly unbothered by the giant leap. As they fall, Yoonha realizes the power she drew from eating that mold was way beyond what she expected. Se-Hoon just smiles to himself, reflecting on how much better this life is going compared to his last one. They soar across the night sky, 2 figures against the moonlit clouds. Meanwhile, back on the ground, a mysterious girl with long black hair is waiting patiently outside the department building. It turns out she'd been there for quite a while, waiting to hand-deliver an invitation to Se-Hoon. Her presence hasn't gone unnoticed, and the Academy's bulletin board is already blowing up with rumors about why she's been standing there for 3 hours. The student body is in a frenzy, gossiping about who exactly she's waiting for. The next day, Se-Hoon catches wind of the rumors but figures if it's actually important, they'll find him again. The quiet of the classroom is shattered when the door is kicked open. A massive, muscular man with a red bandana walks in and introduces himself as Regressor Miles. He wastes no time with theory, ordering the entire class to the training center and promising 20 laps for the last one there. Panic sets in immediately as the students scramble to get a head start. Se-Hoon is just as confused as everyone else, wondering how a theory class turned into a marathon. Despite the suddenness, he kicks into gear and starts weaving through his classmates. He keeps his pace steady, knowing he can't afford to be the last one finishing. 20 laps is a brutal ask, and Se-Hoon is already starting to feel the burn. He forces himself to keep moving, gasping for air as he circles the arena. His stamina is hitting rock bottom, and he starts second-guessing if his previous smelting work was enough to get him through this. Regressor Miles calls for the class's attention as they gather in the vast training arena. He explains that their Understanding Tools class is shifting from theory to practice due to a new threat. The Yomdo hunters have been targeting any blacksmith capable of forging hero-grade, fire-attribute weaponry. Se-Hoon recalls that even before his regression, the case of these hunters remained an unsolved mystery. Regressor emphasizes that regardless of what gear they forge, they must have the strength to protect their own bodies. The instructor announces that today's lesson is all about the sword, and Se-Hoon knows he has to be careful. Se-Hoon keeps running, determined to raise his base stamina through sheer physical exertion. He feels the weight on his wrist, knowing the performance of the gear he just made is already being tested. The rosary ring he's wearing is absorbing his mana to increase its weight, effectively forcing his stats to grow. He checks his progress, determined to make this body battle-ready before his first year at the academy ends. Regressor eventually tells him to stop the running drills and calls him over to the center. Se-Hoon draws on a burst of energy to push past his exhaustion as he faces the instructor. Regressor admits that Se-Hoon is in much better shape than he expected for a student from the forging department. He tosses Se-Hoon a blade, wanting to see if his swordsmanship matches his physical conditioning. Se-Hoon takes a breath, nodding that the rosary ring is going to make even a simple swing incredibly difficult. He steps into a stance, knowing his technique isn't perfect but considering using a trick from his past life. Se-Hoon started swinging his sword, wondering to himself if he should really show all his cards in a mere sparring match. As they begin to spar, the other students whisper about how slow and sluggish Se-Hoon's movements seem. Regressor deflects the blow with ease, but he's privately impressed by how the sword seems to know the correct path. The instructor counters, telling Se-Hoon he's being far too hasty with his follow-up attacks. Regressor advises him that in a real fight, it's often better to accept a minor loss and look for the next opening. Suddenly, the air changes as Se-Hoon's gaze turns sharp and predatory, his eyes flashing with a golden light. Regressor's veteran instincts flare up as he feels a sudden, overwhelming pressure coming from the student. Se-Hoon moves in a blur, his blade coming alive as he executes a high-level strike. The instructor can only watch in shock as the tip of the practice sword stops inches from his throat. Regressor is left trembling, sweat pouring down his face as he processes the sheer speed of that last move. He can't believe he was just genuinely intimidated by a student from the technical department. He tries to regain his composure, wondering if the killing intent he felt was just some kind of delusion. Shaken, he asks Se-Hoon where on earth he learned such a refined and dangerous style of swordsmanship. Se-Hoon offers a small smile, keeping his true origins a secret. He thinks to himself how ironic it is to use a skill that someone once claimed was created in just 10 minutes. He flashes back to the man who taught him, Ma Guangsu, a debtor who preferred teaching skills over paying back money. Ma Guangsu was a chaotic mentor who basically forced his knowledge onto Se-Hoon in lieu of payment. Back in the present, Se-Hoon lies to Regressor, claiming he just roughly imitated the battles of heroes he saw online. Regressor is taken in, asking if Se-Hoon has any genuine intention of learning how to use a sword properly. He writes out a recommendation for a special body control lecture held that afternoon at the Cup building. Se-Hoon heads to the designated hall, wondering what kind of advanced study he's about to walk into. He's greeted by the sound of someone yelling about having absolutely nothing left to teach his students. The man is none other than Ma Guangsu, the retired S-Rank hero known as the Sword Breaker. Se-Hoon can't believe his eyes. The gambling-addicted regular from his past life is actually an academy professor. He steps into the room and introduces himself, presenting the recommendation letter from Regressor. Ma Guangsu is annoyed, nodding that Se-Hoon is now joining the top student from the Borsippa department. Se-Hoon just stares at his former debtor, thinking that this entire situation looks incredibly suspicious. Ma Guangsu asks the eager blonde student if he truly wants to learn under him that badly. He points a finger at the newly arrived Lee Se-Hoon, setting up an impromptu test for the both of them. The professor dictates the terms. A sudden death match where the first person to land a single valid hit is the winner. Ma Guangsu raises his arm, signaling for the two combatants to take their starting positions. "Start," he bellows, and the match begins with an immediate and violent surge of movement. Se-Hoon shifts his weight, the heavy training bracelet on his wrist making every sudden move feel like a struggle. Watching from the sidelines, Ma Guangsu wonders if the top student will utilize a technique to remove his body's natural tension. The Borsippa top student, a blonde youth in a neat white shirt, baits Se-Hoon into what he assumes will be a grappling match. Ma Guangsu grumbles to himself, never having much patience for the complex mind games that top-tier students like to play. Se-Hoon ignores the bait and charges directly in, surprising his opponent with his directness. The two of them collide in a tangle of limbs, their forms becoming a blur as they fight for an opening. Se-Hoon's eyes widened as he felt an overwhelming and unexpected power radiating from the blonde student's body. In the heat of their scramble, both students lose their footing and begin to plummet toward the training mat. Se-Hoon seizes the split-second opportunity, mentally triggering the explosive gravity skill of his forged bracelet. The mana circuits on his wrist flare with a fierce blue light, suddenly and violently multiplying his weight. The amplified force of the gravity pulls them both down hard, ending the match with a thunderous impact. Se-Hoon gasps for air, the sudden strain on his body leaving him bruised and momentarily breathless. His opponent, the prestigious top student of the Borsippa department, lies defeated and face down on the mat. The blonde youth stares blankly at the floor, a trickle of blood from his nose marking his total daze. Se-Hoon looks up at the ceiling with a satisfied grin, knowing that he was just a fraction of a second faster. Professor Ma Guangsu looked down at the two kids sprawled across the floor. He bluntly ordered the blonde student to get out, leaving the boy standing there in utter disbelief. Lee Se-Hoon stays sitting on the floor, questioning if he should be the one teaching instead. Inchial scoffs at the idea of a top student losing to someone from the Borsippa department. On second thought, he decided to take matters into his own hands to ensure this guy could at least protect his own skin on the battlefield. The blonde youth was over the moon at the prospect of being personally trained by a true master. The blonde cadet bows deeply and shouts his thanks before heading out. Now alone, the professor turns his full attention to the boy still sitting there. He wanted to see with his own eyes the specific technique that had laid the blonde kid out flat. Se-Hoon takes a breath and gets into position. He lunges forward with a focused, sharp strike, but the professor is way faster, catching the blow with his bare hand like it's nothing. The boy realizes his surprise attack didn't even make the man flinch. Ma Guangsu calls the execution sloppy, pointing out that a move relying solely on surprise is useless once the secret's out. He warns Se-Hoon that teaching such a reckless technique to others would basically be criminal. The professor promises to help him build a body that can actually handle the stress of that move. Se-Hoon just wants to make sure his class registration is officially good to go. With a quick nod, he takes his leave for the day. Ma Guangsu watches him go, thinking the kid is a bit too blunt for his own good. Outside, Se-Hoon walks away, thinking the old man is just doing repair work while acting high and mighty. The blonde youth suddenly caught up, catching him off guard since he didn't expect the guy to still be hanging around. The former rival holds out a fancy black envelope. It's an invitation to Noblesse, a gathering for the Academy's elite families. Se-Hoon wonders why someone like Erika Inao would be trying to reach out to him. The blonde youth admitted the place was crawling with snobs, but regardless, it was a golden opportunity to change his life. He's genuinely grateful to Se-Hoon for the chance to finally take the class he wanted. Se-Hoon takes the invite with a simple thanks. He heads off alone, mapping out which minor subjects he needs to pick up next. He's deep in thought when he suddenly collides with someone. A girl grabs his wrist before he can even apologize. She's staring intensely at his hand, her eyes wide with a strange obsession. She asks him point-blank if he's the one who made the item he's wearing. He looks at her, confused by the sudden interrogation. The girl, Riaclodal, practically starts drooling over the piece, begging to enchant it. A system notification pops up, confirming he's established an affinity with her. He recognizes the name. In his past life, she was a legendary genius who broke the enchanting industry. She's absolutely floored that he managed to craft something this high quality, using heavyweight ore. She starts muttering to herself about all the formulas she wants to add. Watching her freak out, Se-Hoon realizes she's way more of an eccentric than he expected. She's overwhelmed by the possibilities, unable to decide where to even start. He steps in, telling her not to worry about making a choice. He lets her know he's got plenty more where that came from. Regressor starts geeking out about the resonance effect of the item. Se-Hoon introduces himself as a first-year blacksmith and this year's top student, leaving her speechless. She can't believe a freshman made this, proudly announcing she's a third year in the enchanting department. A guy with short dark hair interrupts them, demanding Se-Hoon follow him for a talk. Rhea stands up, clearly annoyed that their conversation was just cut off by Erica's underling. The guy wants to take things elsewhere, but Se-Hoon just tells him to speak his mind right there. The underling brings up the fact that Se-Hoon tore up Erica's invitation right in front of everyone. Se-Hoon calmly points out that Erica herself was the one who told him to do it. The guy scoffs, mentioning that things would be different if he'd received the invitation from Myers instead. Se-Hoon asks if Erica was actually the one who sent him on this little errand. The goon claims he's acting on his own, while Rhea watches from the side, barely hiding her laughter. She doesn't buy it for a second, mockingly agreeing with a grin. The underling keeps talking down to him, claiming the academy is full of people way better than a nobody from Borsippa. He starts getting worked up, calling Se-Hoon a has-been while Mana begins to swirl around him. Se-Hoon doesn't look even remotely bothered by the sudden show of power. He just stares back with a blank expression as the guy continues his rant. Standing up, Se-Hoon asks if he's actually talking about his own pathetic situation. That's the final straw. The underling snaps and summons a pack of dark spirits to attack. Se-Hoon calmly reaches out as the shadowy forms lunge at him. The black wolves close in, but he's already seen through the trick. He realizes the spell isn't just pure mana, spotting the dagger being used as a physical medium. The underling freezes, sweating as he realizes his attack has been completely neutralized. Se-Hoon just brushes it off, spinning a small item in his hand like it's a toy. He decides it's time to end this, activating the greedy iron affinity seal. The goon lets out a pathetic scream as he realizes his expensive gear is being devoured. This specialized skill allows Se-Hoon to erode and melt any iron it touches, turning it into energy. He finishes the job with an explosive ring, triggering a massive burst of mana. The goon is sent flying back, coughing and gasping for air after the sudden blast. Smoke clears to reveal Se-Hoon standing tall, while the bully is left slumped over on the ground. Rhea turns back to Se-Hoon, ready to get back to their original topic like nothing even happened. Se-Hoon moves on like nothing happened, asking which enchanting classes he should look into. Rhea is taken aback for a second by how nonchalant he is about the whole ordeal. She points him toward ancient enchantment, proudly mentioning that a top-tier senior like Regressor is taking it. The lackey limped away, clutching his stomach and muttering curses under his breath after that humiliating defeat. A voice stops him in his tracks. Someone wants a closer look at the dagger Se-Hoon broke. It was none other than Erica now. She wore a cold, judgmental expression that made the lackey break into an even heavier cold sweat. He quickly hands over the broken weapon, acting like a kicked puppy in front of her. Erica stares at her reflection in the blade and decides to keep this incident a secret from her brother. She noticed the anti-confiscation seal on it. It's clear this isn't just any common piece of scrap metal. She's starting to suspect Se-Hoon designed a specific counterskill just to dismantle her family's sorcery. Back in the lecture hall, the academic records for Se-Hoon's aptitude are already being revised upward. Se-Hoon gets a system ping. A connection with Erica has been established, much to his surprise. He wonders if she was hiding in the shadows earlier, watching him deal with her underling. He looks at the junk he took as compensation. It's crude, but it'll make a great snack for his dagger. He tries to focus on Professor Kim In-cheol's lecture, but hearing basic theory for the 100th time is a struggle. Professor Kim cuts the talk short and gets straight to the point. It's time for a live demonstration. With a light touch, he begins shifting the mana array within a solid block of metal. The iron flows like liquid, morphing into different shapes with perfect precision. He demonstrates how a blacksmith's skill determines the diversity and quality of the final weapon. The core lesson is simple. You have to understand the metal's potential before you even touch it. Today's challenge is metal transformation. Se-Hoon watches closely as the ingots are handed out. The task is to create a small notch and then restore the metal to its original, pristine state. They've only got 10 minutes. Se-Hoon notes that the professor's methods are actually quite sophisticated. While the rest of the class starts panicking as their iron refuses to cooperate, Kim watches calmly. Only 2 students are actually making real progress: Se-Hoon and a guy named Hans Warmuth. They finish at the exact same time, both placing their perfectly restored ingots down. Impressed by their speed, Kim tells them they're moving on to the advanced stage immediately. He projects a complex mana array onto the screen and tells them to apply it to their ingots. Hans shoots a cocky look at Se-Hoon, thinking his family's techniques will give him an easy win. The next pattern is a mess of interlocking geometric shapes that that would give most students a headache. Hans dives in, confident he's nailing the complexity while Se-Hoon remains silent. He produces a perfect-looking replica of the array and can't help but gloat about his success. Professor Kim steps up and calls out Hans Warmut's name, but his tone isn't exactly congratulatory. He gives one final order: restore the iron ingot back to its original rectangular form. Hans gave it a shot, but the connections and structures simply crumbled and cracked. The mana array remained stuck in its final form, refusing to shift back. Kim sighs. He tells Hans his entire approach was flawed from the very first step. He reiterates his point. Hans forced the metal instead of understanding its limits. Hans stands there humiliated, looking at the black, ruined lump of iron in his hands. The professor warns that this lack of foresight leads to equipment that breaks when it's needed most. Se-Hoon glances over, wondering if Hans even realizes where he went wrong. Se-Hoon's ingot, meanwhile, is sitting there looking like a piece of abstract art, completely stable. Kim gives it a look and simply says, "That will do." The rest of the class is whispering in disbelief. They all thought the transformation was impossible. Kim asks Se-Hoon if he can show everyone that transformation one more time. Se-Hoon just smiles and plays it off, claiming he only pulled it off because the school's iron is high quality. Se-Hoon has essentially cracked a legendary problem. Kim Incheol is stunned. He's realizing this kid did something even he couldn't see. The professor is kicking himself. He was so focused on the basic lesson that he completely missed the advanced technique Se-Hoon just pulled off. This legendary blacksmith, Raikens, was the only one who could solve this formula decades ago. It stayed unbroken until today. The truth of iron transformation was meant to be an impossible wall for every student in this hall. Kim Incheol is still in a daze. He never thought a mere cadet could master a formula that's been a headache for pros for years. As the sun sets on Babel Academy, the shift in Se-Hoon's reputation is already well underway. Kim Incheol stops Se-Hoon as he's heading out. He wants to have a private word with the genius who just blew his mind. He pulls out a case containing a brilliant red stone, a gift for choosing his department over the others. It's a crimson flame gem, a rare material with the power to melt different ores into a single liquid form. Kim explains that if Se-Hoon absorbs this essence, he can permanently boost the strength of his own crimson flame. Se-Hoon accepts it with a polite bow. This stone is exactly what he needs for his next risky move. The professor then offers him a spot in his elective course, clearly wanting to keep this talent close. Se-Hoon recognizes the class, Weapon Origin Studies. Kim is impressed the boy has already heard of it. He agrees to enroll, knowing it's one of the most well-funded and exclusive classes in the academy. Se-Hoon reflects on the fact that he never even heard of Kim Incheol in his past life. This guy didn't have a happy ending back then. He decides right then that he'll change that. He's officially enrolling in the class. Kim is slightly surprised given Se-Hoon's already heavy workload, but he's not about to say no. They seal the deal with a handshake, and Se-Hoon can feel the sheer mana radiating from the man. Se-Hoon gets a system notification. He's successfully extracting affinity from his new teacher. He ends up with fire-infused iron. It's high rank and perfect for storing intense flames internally. Back in his room, Se-Hoon sits in meditation. If he can forge metal, why can't he forge his own body? Most blacksmiths stick to one attribute, because multiple manas usually cause a violent internal conflict. But Se-Hoon has already exhausted the mana that usually keeps his internal heat in check. He holds the crimson flame gem. His body is now a hollow vessel ready to be filled with that power. His goal is to construct a permanent mana circuit inside himself, specifically for the crimson flame. It's an agonizing process. He grits his teeth as the raw energy starts to burn through his system. A massive surge of red mana erupts as he begins the refinement of his own flesh and bone. He's literally forging himself from the inside out, enduring the kind of heat that would melt normal steel. The process works, and his crimson flame mana is immediately strengthened and upgraded. He's acquired the S-Rank skill, Body Refinement Divine Magic. All his base stats take a massive jump. He checks his new status. Strength, endurance, and mana have all hit D-Rank. He's becoming a monster. Exhausted, he collapses to the floor. In his mind, a familiar figure from his past life appears to mock his effort. It's his old mentor, asking if he's really going to give up when there's still material right in front of him. Se-Hoon wakes up with a renewed sense of purpose. He's going to squeeze every last bit of value out of everything around him, whether it's a future ally or a deadly enemy. He's using it all to make sure he has zero regrets this time around. The clock tower at Babel Academy rings out as an announcement tells the students to put the finishing touches on their latest projects. The instructor reminds everyone that today's results will set the tone for the entire semester, so they shouldn't leave any room for regrets. Inside the forge, students are hammering away, desperate to finish their pieces before the deadline. Se-Hoon looks over a blade, realizing his current body is still too clumsy to keep up with the master-level techniques in his mind. He grips his hammer tight, knowing he can't afford to take it easy if he wants to fix those physical misalignments. Sparks fly as he pours everything into his strikes, before plunging the hot metal into the water for quenching. After the long session, he holds up a finished sword, hoping this one will be enough to bridge the gap between his past and present. He's covered in sweat, but he's convinced it's better to forge one perfect blade than a bunch of mediocre ones. He tests the edge, the metal sliding smoothly as he checks for any hidden flaws. As he is sharpening the blade, he can already feel its balance shifting toward absolute precision. Se-Hoon lets out a breath as he feels something within him finally click into place. A mental image of a massive wave crashing down hits him, the distinct sound of his previous limitations being shattered. He knows that specific ringing in the air. It only happens when a masterwork is truly born. As the glow fades, he sees a keen edge that isn't just sharp, but practically infused with his own will. A system window pops up, confirming the successful completion of the White Light Greatsword. Not only that, but he's also unlocked a new skill called White Light Style. The sword is ranked as rare grade, with a quality so high it synchronizes perfectly with mana. Se-Hoon thinks it's just passable since he only used common iron, but the student next to him is completely floored by the result. He smiles to himself, feeling his pre-regression skills slowly but surely returning. While Se-Hoon is satisfied, the rest of the class looks like they're ready to quit after seeing his work. By Saturday morning, he's meeting up with Regressor, who's surprised he actually wants to watch her work. He tells her he's just curious about her fundamentals while they navigate the crowded city streets. Rhea leads him far out of the way, heading toward a secluded area deep in the countryside. They finally reach their destination, a rustic workshop known as Acklecuff Smithy. Rhea shouts out for her grandma as they step inside, with Se-Hoon following close behind. A sharp-eyed woman named Helena looks up from her work, telling Rhea to pipe down since she isn't deaf. Helena immediately asks if Se-Hoon is Rhea's boyfriend, which makes them both react with instant annoyance. She takes one look at him and scoffs, calling him a soft-looking brat and questioning Babel Academy's standards. Se-Hoon introduces himself properly, but Helena just brushes it off and states her own name. She tells them to stop wasting time and get to work since they've got a massive backlog of orders to get through. She gestures toward the back, showing them the way to the actual workshop area. Se-Hoon watches her move, realizing her skills are far more advanced than he first expected. Looking around at the simple kitchenware, he wonders why a master like her is running a basic hardware shop in a place like this. Rhea shows him her enchantment palette, filled with specialized powders made from ground mana stones. Se-Hoon notices the variety of colors is way beyond the standard, and asks if her job is just restoring old formulas. Rhea digs through her kit, and finally finds exactly what she was looking for. She explains that working here lets her practice her enchantments as much as she wants without worrying about the cost of materials. She loads up her brush with glowing golden mana, preparing to start the process. A glowing magic circle forms on the back of a frying pan as she begins applying the enchantment. Se-Hoon watches her intently, remembering that he heard she was currently stuck in a deep slump. He thinks about how people who constantly fail can't even hold on to their spots, reflecting on the pressure Rhea is under. After seeing her work in person, he thinks he's finally figured out exactly what's holding her back and how to fix it. Helena acknowledges Se-Hoon's intense focus, nodding that the ability to lose oneself in work like that is a rare talent in itself. Se-Hoon takes a moment to scan the workshop, taking in the various tools and materials scattered around the room. He spots a crate of special materials, recognizing them as components that resonate with mana circuits to provide unique effects. Se-Hoon admits his hands have been itching to engrave a specific style again, and Helena tells him to go ahead and give it a shot. She points to a cluttered pile of items, challenging him to pick anything if he thinks he's actually capable of it. Se-Hoon decides that if he gets to use a high-quality whetstone like the one in front of him, he might as well take her up on the offer. He reaches out and picks up a simple, unremarkable kitchen knife from the workbench. Helena looks at his choice with a bit of skepticism, asking if he's really planning to go with that one. Se-Hoon examines the blade closely, noting its perfect alignment and lack of warping, which tells him it was made by a true professional. He selects a whetstone with perfectly compressed mana particles, confident he can push the edge to its absolute limit. With steady, practiced movements, he begins sharpening the knife on the mana-infused stone. Helena watches him, sweating slightly as she starts to wonder if he really is just a freshman who just enrolled. Suddenly, Regressor bursts out with a victory cry, holding up a frying pan she just finished enchanting. Rhea is surprised to see her grandmother and Se-Hoon together, but Helena just grumpily tells the brat she has no idea when they arrive. A man in a pinstriped suit watches from the doorway, teasing Helena about getting put in her place by a junior. Helena tells him to shut his mouth and delivers a sharp flick so hard that it sends his glasses flying across the room. She turns back to Se-Hoon and asks if he's finished, and he gives her a modest nod. He presents the finished knife, admitting it's the best he can do for now, but promising to improve in the future. Helena tells them both to head out, dismissing them so she can get back to her own work. As they leave, Rhea thinks her grandmother is just being cranky for no reason and leads Se-Hoon away. Helena stands alone in the workshop, staring at the knife Se-Hoon sharpened with an expression of pure disbelief. The man in the suit barges back in, loudly asking his sister if she's finished smelting yet. Helena tells him to keep his voice down while he searches for the kitchen knife he needs for his restaurant orders. She asks him when he's finally going to quit his restaurant hobby, considering he's a lead professor in the swordsmanship department. He finds the knife and picks it up, eager to get back to his own business. But as soon as he catches a glimpse of the blade's edge, his face goes completely blank. He asks Helena if she sharpened it while she was drunk again, or if one of the TAs has suddenly become a genius. When she reveals it was actually a freshman, the professor is left absolutely speechless. Helena repeats herself for emphasis, confirming that the person responsible is a new student from this year's class. The professor looks out toward the exit, wondering just who this mysterious freshman could possibly be. On the walk back, Se-Hoon asks Rhea if there's a specific story behind why the metallurgy department is so empty. He thinks about how it eventually becomes the weakest department at Babel, after most of the professors leave over the next decade. Rhea changes the subject, asking how he liked her enchantment, and he tells her that her fundamentals were solid. She laughs it off as no big deal, but Se-Hoon bluntly tells her that her thinking is far too narrow. He points out that she obviously thought of a better method, but chose not to use it, leaving her completely stunned. He explains that intentionally suppressing her own talent is a major problem, especially for a creator. Rhea is shaken to her core, realizing that Se-Hoon saw right through her mental block. Se-Hoon reaches into his coat, preparing to give her a direct demonstration of what he means. He draws a knife and tells her to pay close attention because his schedule is tight, and he doesn't have much time. He explains that if forging is the act of creating a stone and placing it beneath the water's surface, then enchantment is carving the image of that submerged stone onto the water's surface, like a dream made real. He activates the enchantment, and the blade instantly flares with the intense power of the Crimson Lotus. Se-Hoon calls for a white radiance to flow, demonstrating a different facet of his enchantment skills to the fascinated Rhea. He explains that an enchantment shouldn't just sit on the exterior. It needs to be woven deep beneath the surface of the weapon. Rhea watches intently as he describes the process of dividing an enchantment into multiple layers for maximum effect. Spinning the knife with practiced ease, Se-Hoon continues his lecture on the intricacies of high-level smithing. To prove his point, he drives the blade into the wooden surface of the workbench with a single, sharp motion. The knife remains embedded in the wood, still glowing with the faint, swirling remnants of his dual-layered enchantment. A tangible sense of killing intent from the Crimson Lotus effect trickles down the blade, flowing exactly as he intended. Se-Hoon thinks to himself that while this is just a basic demonstration, it's exactly what Rhea needs to see to break her slump. Rhea reflects on his words, realizing that geniuses continue to forge their paths even when they're filled with doubt and hesitation. Desperate to learn more, she begs her junior to let her borrow the enchanted knife for further study. She comically shakes Se-Hoon back and forth, promising to remake the item perfectly and return it if he'll just let her have it. Se-Hoon relents and hands it over, even offering her a bundle of high-quality materials to help with her training. Rhea is overjoyed, hopping around with the knife held high while shouting her gratitude to her generous junior. Se-Hoon watches her dash off, wondering if he's made the right choice in entrusting his work to such an eccentric person. A system notification appears, confirming that he's established a level 1 connection with Rhea from the perspective of a creator. Later that day, Se-Hoon heads toward the Marshall Hall, eager to see a clash between two of the most famous figures of his past. Erika Inao follows him silently, leading Se-Hoon to turn back and ask what exactly she thinks she's doing. She tells him she's just following him, and she maintains her stoic expression even when he asks if she'd leave if ordered. Erika says she'll just watch from a distance, a response that leaves Se-Hoon feeling slightly exasperated by her persistence. He gives up on arguing and leads her into the massive arena, deciding it's better to just focus on the upcoming match. A status window identifies Erika Inao as a Society Contact Stone, a high-grade artificial ore used to stabilize mana arrangements. Another window pops up for Rhea, labeling her a Mis-Explosion Catalyst that can draw out the full potential of mixed materials. The crowd's roar fills the air as the announcer welcomes the new students to the highlight of the day, The ranking match. The youngest professor in the martial arts department, Lan Fang, takes the stage as the match's energetic host. Lan Fang wastes no time and begins the introductions for the two formidable competitors about to face off. A bright spotlight focuses on a lone figure at the center of the ring, the undisputed top senior of the fourth-year class. She is introduced as the heir of the Myers family, a 3-year reigning champion and an active A-rank hero. The champion is revealed to be the legendary Holy Sword Master, Arya Myers, her blonde hair shimmering under the arena lights. As the crowd cheers for Arya, Lan Fang introduces the first challenger of the day, a rising star with a lot to prove. A tall spearman steps into the light, identified as the inheritor of the Flame-Wheel Withering Blossom spear from the third-year class. Se-Hoon watches the newcomer with a slight smile, thinking about the long history they share from his previous life. The challenger is revealed as the intense Yom Sungha, also known as the Mad Dog, his eyes burning with blue fire. The two warriors clash immediately, their weapons meeting in a massive explosion of flame and steel. Yom Sungha unleashes a series of rapid strikes with his spear, the air around him swirling with a violent, fiery aura. Arya Myers remains perfectly composed, her sword ready as she waits for the perfect moment to counter her opponent's rage. Their weapons meet with a thunderous bang, creating a brilliant flare that illuminates the entire martial hall. Yom Sungha grinds his teeth in frustration, clearly feeling the immense pressure of facing the Academy's top student. Arya effortlessly parries a blast of flame, her movements so precise that she barely seems to be exerting herself. A confident smile plays on her lips, and her golden eyes glow with an otherworldly light as she enjoys the heat of the fight. She stands tall amidst a swirling vortex of fire, looking every bit like the unstoppable champion she's claimed to be. With a sudden, powerful strike, she sends Yom Sungha flying across the arena, his spear barely absorbing the impact. Se-Hoon watches the one-sided exchange with a critical gaze, disappointed that Yom Sungha hasn't yet reached his full potential. Se-Hoon watches the duel with a critical eye, thinking that while many things are off, the biggest issue lies with the weapon Yom Sungha wields. Yom Sungha launches a final, high-speed attack, but his technique feels incomplete without the proper equipment. The clash ends in an instant when Arya Myers stops her blade inches from Yom Sungha's neck, ending the match in a total stalemate. The challenger is left breathless, the sharp point of the Holy Sword Master's weapon serving as a cold testament to her superior skill. Overwhelmed by the realization of his loss, Yom Sungha lowers his head and formally concedes the fight. Arya Myers stands victorious and composed, giving a simple, polite nod to her opponent for his efforts. A deafening roar of cheers sweeps through the martial hall as the scoreboard flashes the final result. Arya Myers remains undefeated. Lan Fang takes the stage with her microphone, announcing that the post-match interview will be cut short as the challenger has already left. Arya laughs to herself, relieved she doesn't have to face another rank 9 fighter right away after such an intense bout. To appease the restless audience, Lan Fang suggests a Q&A session while the frustrated Yom Sungha stomps away in the background. Se-Hoon decides he's seen enough, nodding that the Mad Dog is clearly in a foul mood after his embarrassing defeat. Erika Anao is taken aback when Se-Hoon stands to leave, questioning why he wouldn't stay for the rest of the festivities. As he descends the stairs, Se-Hoon mutters about how annoying the host is, clearly uninterested in the school's social events. Erika follows closely, relieved that he wasn't there to see her brother, but she remains puzzled by the intensity of Se-Hoon's irritation. She looks at him with newfound focus, realizing that this particular freshman might be more than he initially appeared to be. On the arena floor, Arya Myers pauses and looks back toward the stands, as if sensing a peculiar presence among the crowd. Her eyes glow with a piercing light as she spots Se-Hoon's silhouette, sensing that there is indeed one student worth keeping an eye on. A quiet park near the martial hall, Yom Sungha sits alone on the steps, taking a deep breath after his match. Lee Se-Hoon watches him from a distance. Yom Sungha alive and well, he notes to himself. Se-Hoon remembers him as a future pillar of the final strike force. He's hopping to secure a bond stone now without things getting messy. Sungha senses the presence and looks over his shoulder. He asks if Se-Hoon was watching him. He stands up, impressed that anyone managed to track him down to this spot. Sungha recognizes him as Borsipa's faculty top student. He's curious why someone like Se-Hoon would be looking for him. Se-Hoon keeps it light, saying he just wanted to talk for a bit. Sungha's expression immediately turns sour. He isn't interested in making friends. He tells Se-Hoon to leave, his patience already wearing thin. Sungha doesn't sugarcoat it. He flat out says he hates weaklings. If Se-Hoon has nothing important to say, he should beat it. He especially despises those who rely on cheap tricks to act like they're equals. He dismisses Se-Hoon with a wave of his hand. Sung-ha calls him a blacksmith with pure disdain, thinking he's just some support student. Se-Hoon smirks. Compared to the mad dog from the original timeline, this version of Sung-ha is actually pretty tame. Talking clearly isn't an option anymore. Se-Hoon's hand begins to glow with mana as he prepares for a confrontation. Sung-ha sees the defiance and realizes the first-year student really isn't going to back off. He decides to give one final warning as he closes the distance between them. Sung-ha declares that his family's spear technique's history is going to end right here because of Se-Hoon's interference. He lunges forward, a heavy punch aimed directly at the kid. Sung-ha's fist was relentless as sparks of mana crackled violently through the air. Unfazed, Se-Hoon moves with perfect timing to intercept the senior's blow. A system message flashes. Bond engraving Greed Iron is activating. Se-Hoon effortlessly brushes aside the mana-packed punch. Sung-ha is completely caught off guard. Sung-ha acknowledges the first year has some skill after all, but he isn't backing down yet. Se-Hoon notices the ember trails, residual mana lingering in the air from the previous strike. Sung-ha declares he's ending this now, and prepares a massive mana-infused strike. A huge flare of energy erupts as the two clash in the center of the park. The impact sends smoke and embers flying everywhere, obscuring the scene. Se-Hoon stands calm in the middle of the settling dust, exhaling slowly. Sung-ha stares in disbelief. His own mana trails are responding to Se-Hoon's hand instead of his. He realizes Se-Hoon didn't just block the attack, he broke the mana and stole it for himself. Sung-ha is on the verge of losing it. Se-Hoon can see the rage boiling over in his eyes. Se-Hoon remembers this same temper is what led to the Yeomwa Gate massacre in the future. A vision of the future, Mad Dog, appears, standing amidst a bloodied battlefield with his spear. The Greed Iron effect is almost gone, and Se-Hoon's body is reaching its absolute limit. Since a clean bond is off the table, Se-Hoon decides he'll have to break him instead. They clash one more time with a violent shockwave that shakes the entire area. A hand suddenly catches the strike, stopping the fight dead in its tracks. Jake Myers has intervened, gripping both their arms to prevent any more damage. Se-Hoon looks surprised. Jake is shaking from the effort of holding them back, asking Sung-ha if he really knows who he's messing with. Sung-ha stares at the blonde student, realizing his fight is being cut short. He tells them to just go. Jake pulls Se-Hoon away, relieved that the tension is finally breaking. Jake tells Se-Hoon to stop saying weird things and just keep moving before things get worse. Sung-ha stands alone, realizing his temper almost dragged his master's reputation through the mud. Jake stands over Se-Hoon, looking frustrated. He can't believe the first year just walked into a fight with a senior like that. He yells at Se-Hoon, warning him that he could have actually died if Jake hadn't stepped in when he did. Se-Hoon just stands there with his hands in his pockets, completely unfazed. Se-Hoon just smirks, brushing off the near-death warning. Jake is left gaping, wondering how someone could be so nonchalant about picking a fight with a mad dog. A system message pops up for Se-Hoon, confirming that a bond has been formed with Yeom Sung-ha. He's already thinking about the next step, bond extraction. He stares at a literal playing card representing Sung-ha, noting that the mad dog version he remembers was much more intense. He'll have to find a way to increase that bond level to get the best results. Se-Hoon looks back at Jake, who's rubbing his own arm. Jake asks if Se-Hoon's hand is all right after that heavy clash. Jake waves it off with a laugh, showing his slightly reddened hand. He brags that his hands are the toughest part of him, so he's doing just fine. Se-Hoon glances at the hand, acknowledging that it does look strong, but he quickly shifts the conversation back to the arena. Jake asks if Se-Hoon mentioned something about his sister back there. Se-Hoon confirms, asking if he means Arya Myers. Jake starts to panic, recalling that Arya was asking a lot of questions about the new student. Se-Hoon doesn't help the situation, bluntly calling her annoying. Jake's face goes pale as he realizes his sister has actually taken a personal interest in this guy. It's a terrifying thought for any brother. He repeats it for emphasis. The holy swordmaster herself is looking at Se-Hoon. Se-Hoon remains silent, his expression unreadable. Se-Hoon notes that Arya must have sharp ears to have heard anything from the noisy spectator stands. In his mind, she's definitely a presence to be wary of. Jake tells him to shut up before he makes things worse. Se-Hoon thinks to himself that if he gets the attention of Sungha's rival, his own presence at the academy will naturally grow. Jake sighs, telling him not to take it so lightly. He starts to explain just how dangerous his sister can be. Se-Hoon cuts him off, calling Arya petty and scheming. Jake is caught off guard by the sudden and specific insult. He stammers, trying to process why Se-Hoon has such a deep-seated dislike for a hero everyone else adores. Jake asks the million-dollar question, what did she ever do to make him hate her this much? Se-Hoon's gaze hardens as a dark memory surfaces. A vision of Holy Swordmaster, Arya Myers, appears in Se-Hoon's mind. She was the peak of grace and power in the previous timeline. But then she vanished without a trace, leaving a void where a hero used to be. When she reappeared, she wasn't a hero anymore. She was a monster using the remains of a demon god as a blade. The demon god of annihilating light was a name that inspired pure terror. Back in the present, Se-Hoon doesn't give a real reason. He just tells Jake that he doesn't like her face. He turns and starts walking away, waving a hand dismissively. He's done with this conversation. Jake is left standing in the street, completely baffled. He has no idea what could have possibly happened between them in the past. Later, Jake's phone buzzes with a notification. He looks down, a sense of dread washing over him. It's a message from Arya saying she's made a very interesting friend. She tells Jake he'll be hearing a lot about him from now on. Jake realizes with a sinking feeling that he's just been drafted as the middleman between his sister and the academy's most unpredictable student. Arya's text finishes with a request for a favor, accompanied by a deceptively sweet-looking profile picture. Jake can practically feel the scheming coming through the screen. He walks down the alleyway alone, cursing his luck. He's trapped between a rock and a hard place. The next morning, the scene shifts to a lecture hall at Babel Academy. Se-Hoon is slumped in his seat, rubbing his face and wondering if he went a bit too far with Sungha the day before. Suddenly, the doors fly open. An elderly man in a top hat comes rolling into the room on a motorized cart, demanding everyone's attention. He introduces himself as Reese Doba, the professor in charge of their major classes for the next 2 weeks. The subject is attribute smithing. The students whisper among themselves, recognizing Doba as the professor famous for being a complete lunatic. Doba ignores them and prepares to hand out last week's evaluations. Doba starts calling names one by one to come up and receive their grades and budgets. He goes through the list until he reaches the very last name. He calls out Lee Se-Hoon with a sharp look. Se-Hoon stands up and heads toward the front. The other students watch him, jealous and wondering how much of a budget he's going to pull. Doba drops a bombshell. Se-Hoon doesn't have a budget yet. Se-Hoon stops in his tracks, confused. The professor explains that Se-Hoon's submission was so high quality that they decided to handle it differently. Instead of a standard grade, they're putting his piece in an open auction alongside the second-year students' work on Wednesday. Se-Hoon wonders if the vice dean is behind this sudden change. Se-Hoon accepts the decision, knowing that if it were really a problem, the other professors would have stepped in. He nods and takes his seat. Doba claps his hands together, announcing that today's lesson will be about dealing with residual mana. He mentions he has a volunteer to help with the demonstration. A tall student walks into the room. It's Yom Sungha, introduced as the temporary TA from the third-year Spear Arts Department. Se-Hoon can't help but stare. The classroom is filled with murmurs as the students watch Yom Sungha. One student wonders why a top-tier senior like him is acting as a TA for their class. Professor Reese Doba, riding his motorized cart, cuts the introductions short. He wants to get straight to the core concepts before they start practicing. Doba begins explaining the nature of residual mana in weapon crafting. He notes that it typically comes in 2 distinct forms, illustrated by swirling energy patterns on the screen. He describes the second type, the independent core, which can generate its own mana or pull it from the environment. This type is significantly more complex and difficult to master. Doba adjusts his spectacles, explaining that there's no set standard for building such a core. The process varies wildly depending on the materials used and the smith's individual mana. He announces they'll start with the more basic, charged type. He then signals to his assistant to step forward for the demonstration. Yom Sungha steps up, his hand beginning to glow with a vibrant, swirling red energy. The air around him seems to ripple from the heat. Dober explains that fire mana is notoriously volatile and difficult to use as residual mana. However, if one can properly suppress its wild nature, it provides incredible sustainability. Sungha executes the demonstration, creating multiple rings of fire. Dober identifies the technique as the Flame Wheel Blossoming Spear, a high-level feat for a student. The students are awestruck by Sungha's level of control. Assistant Han looks on in disbelief, noting how much he struggles just to manage fire in a furnace, let alone like this. Doba seems pleased with the reaction, telling the class to make the most of having such a talented TA. He hands out the next assignment, which is due the following Thursday. He gives them creative freedom within the theme of the demonstration. The whiteboard behind him remains blank, leaving the specifics up to their imagination. The professor wraps up the lecture and tells everyone to head to the forge. He reminds them to change into their working clothes before they start. Hans Barmut sees this as his golden opportunity. He watches Sungha stand with his arms crossed, preparing to make his move. He rushes forward with an eager smile, introducing himself to the senior. He thinks talking to someone as famous as Yom Sungha is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Sungha isn't interested in small talk. Before the student can even finish his sentence, Sungha tells him to beat it with a cold, dismissive glare. The rejection is so sharp, it leaves the other students in the room frozen like white silhouettes. They can feel the oppressive aura radiating from the senior. Sungha's eyes remain focused and cold. He has no patience for those he deems unworthy of his time. As the room empties, Sungha calls out to Se-Hoon, who is about to leave. Se-Hoon stops and looks back over his shoulder. Se-Hoon asks what the senior wants with him. The atmosphere between the two is immediately tense, contrasting with the empty classroom. Se-Hoon begins to dissect Sungha's performance, mentioning that the Flame Wheel Blossoming Spear is usually measured by how many wheels one can maintain. He notes that the current head of Yeomwa Gate, A-rank hero Lee Won-ryong, reached 8 wheels. After finishing his analysis, Se-Hoon starts walking out of the room, casually nodding that Sungha maintained those 3 rings with ease. He calculates that Sungha could easily sustain 6 if he actually put in the effort. Intrigued by Se-Hoon's words, Sungha quickly catches up to him, demanding to know exactly what he meant by all that. Se-Hoon drops a bombshell, asking if Sungha once reached 7 wheels in the past. Sungha's eyes widen in shock as his secret is laid bare. Se-Hoon continues his analysis, noting that Sungha suddenly lost the ability to hold that many wheels one day. Sungha is paralyzed, wondering how Se-Hoon could possibly know a secret he's never told anyone. Se-Hoon explains that he has a natural talent for fire, and something about the way Sungha's flames move just feels off to him. He describes Sungha's current style as half-hearted, like he's holding back a massive reserve of power and just flinging the excess around without any real passion. Sungha finally speaks, his voice tense as he asks if Se-Hoon knows the cause of his decline. He's desperate for an answer. Se-Hoon admits he has a guess, but he doesn't immediately offer the information. He watches Sungha's reaction closely. He bluntly states he doesn't see a reason to tell him. Sungha's face falls into a comical expression of disbelief and frustration at the sudden denial. Se-Hoon starts to walk away again, telling Sungha that he can name what he wants in exchange for the answer. Sungha clenches his fist, realizing he's being manipulated. Se-Hoon lays out his conditions. First, Sungha will pay a fair price for every bit of advice and help Se-Hoon provides. He holds up 1 finger for emphasis. Then he holds up 2 fingers, adding the second condition. Whenever Sungha runs into a situation he can't handle or judge, he must come to Se-Hoon first. He tells him to decide before they reach the forge. Sungha weighs his options, the sweat on his brow showing how much this means to him. He finally agrees to the terms, his expression serious. He adds his own caveat. He'll do it if Se-Hoon can provide actual proof of his claims. Se-Hoon just smirks over his shoulder, confident that he has the senior exactly where he wants him. Yom Sungha agrees to the deal, though the sweat on his face shows he's definitely on edge. Lee Se-Hoon gives him a sideways glance and a smirk, reminding him that he'll need to see some real proof first. Later that afternoon in the forging room, the usual chatter of students fills the workspace. The other students are already whispering, shocked that Se-Hoon is planning to forge without even sketching out a blueprint. He starts mixing fire and dark attribute ores, aiming for a very specific 7:3 ratio in the crucible. Observers are skeptical, thinking he's just wasting materials since elemental mana usually just evaporates when handled like this. Se-Hoon watches the heat closely, waiting for the exact second the elemental mana begins to seep out of the ore. He tightens his wrist wraps, getting ready for the most technical part of the forging process. This is thermal displacement, a high-level technique where he balances the flames and mana simultaneously to force the metal to absorb the elemental power. Professor Reese Doba watches from the corner, stunned to see a first-year student already mastering such a difficult method. Se-Hoon knows that while it looks standard to the others, Sungha is seeing a completely different level of skill. Sungha watches with total focus, realizing there's more to this smith than just talk. Se-Hoon keeps the rhythm steady, pumping the bellows to maintain the forge's temperature. He guides the fire mana to spread outward on the inside, while the dark mana burrows inward, creating a perfect circle of energy. Sungha and the professor stand in silence, taking in the precision of the work. Sungha looks on in awe, his eyes reflecting the realization that he's been using his dual attributes all wrong. He rubs his head sheepishly, admitting that his lack of control has caused his mastery wheel level to drop. He explains that while 5 black flame wheels are technically stronger than 7 regular ones, he still lacks the energy to reach the required level. Sungha mentions that his sect sends an instructor regularly to verify that their successors are keeping up with their training. He's terrified because falling below the 6th wheel means he'll lose his status as the successor to the Manhwa sect. Se-Hoon asks if he can just fake it using the old way this one time, but Sungha knows that's impossible. He tries to summon his power, but the dark attribute mana immediately flares out of control, refusing to listen. When Se-Hoon asks when the instructor is coming, Sungha lets out a long sigh and says it's tomorrow. Se-Hoon thinks it over, knowing that losing his status would lead straight to excommunication for Sungha. Sungha grabs Se-Hoon's shoulder, practically begging for a way out. Se-Hoon asks if he's really willing to do anything to save his position, and Sungha doesn't hesitate to say yes. Se-Hoon's gaze stays cold as he accepts the challenge. It's time to get to work. A system window appears as Se-Hoon extracts the Crimson Resonance Black Stone, a high-quality ore that vibrates with both fire and dark mana. He leads Sungha to the Akal Cup private training room, a restricted area that only the top rankers are allowed to use. Se-Hoon uses his access to tweak the room's holographic skin, preparing a specialized training environment. The entire room shifts, turning into a perfect replica of the Manhwa sect's own training grounds. Sungha is stunned by the resemblance, but Se-Hoon just tells him his master sent him the data to use sometimes. Se-Hoon pulls out a red stone, ready to create a specific training tool to fix Sungha's mana issues. He channels his energy into the Crimson Resonance Black Stone, shaping it for the weapon. The system confirms the stone's advanced rank, noting that its resonance is perfect for balancing opposing mana types. In seconds, Se-Hoon finishes a short spear with the stone embedded into its frame. Sungha looks at the dual spears with skepticism, finding the idea of using 2 weapons at once even more awkward. Se-Hoon tells him to stop complaining and focus on creating a flame wheel in his left hand, while releasing dark mana in his right. Sungha takes a breath, centering himself as he prepares to try the impossible. He begins to spin the spears, and a violent swirl of fire and dark energy erupts around him. The shock of the power leaves Sungha completely stunned, his eyes wide as he realizes what just happened. Confused by the sensation, he asks Se-Hoon for an explanation, and the smith points out that he was unconsciously leaking dark mana into the wrong hand. Se-Hoon explains that Sungha's manas are clashing, because he's been trying too hard to suppress the dark attribute for his entire life. He hands over a specialized wristband, explaining that once Sungha learns to channel both manas at the same time, reaching the 6th wheel will be easy. Sungha takes up his spear, starting to see the true potential of the equipment Se-Hoon has provided for him. 3 hours into the intense training session, Sungha is already moving with much more fluid precision, his flames following the dual spears. Se-Hoon watches the progress closely, noting how quickly the warrior is adapting to a training method originally designed by his future self. He's curious to see if Sungha can truly live up to the legendary reputation of his own past self. The training breakdown is incredibly detailed, covering everything from his breathing pattern to subtle shifts in his center of gravity. Sungha focuses on the wavelength of mana circulating through his body, trying to release it perfectly at the tip of the spear. Se-Hoon keeps staring intently at every movement, which Sungha finds a bit unnerving, but Se-Hoon just calls it necessary data collection. Sungha knows he can't argue with results, especially since he's relying on the weapon Se-Hoon is currently crafting for him. Se-Hoon plays it down, claiming he's only making the spear for a class assignment, which gets a defensive retort from Sungha about the skill of a first-year student. Se-Hoon decides to change the subject, getting a bit more serious about why Sungha is so desperate to stay in his position. He asks why Sungha feels such a strong need to maintain his status as the successor to his sect. Sungha looks away for a moment, stating simply that it's what his master wants for him. He feels a deep sense of duty, believing that, as a disciple, his only path is to follow his master's will. Sungha's loyalty stems from his childhood. He was an orphan taken in and raised by the legendary S-Rank hero Yom Jin-hyun. Even though Jin-hyun retired due to injury and lost his power, his influence over Sungha as a father figure is absolute. Se-Hoon realizes the depth of their bond, as a system notification confirms their bond level has increased to level 3. Sungha eventually asks the obvious question, why exactly is Se-Hoon putting in all this effort to help him? Se-Hoon gives a faint, knowing smile as he looks at the warrior, but he doesn't answer immediately. He shows Sungha a vision of the 6 great demon realms, desolate lands teeming with demonic beasts that have swallowed civilization. Se-Hoon explains that he plans to conquer those realms, and to do that, he needs powerful warriors to protect him while he handles the gear. He makes a blunt point about money too, saying a sect leader needs both wealth and skill, which Sungha finds a bit too materialistic. Se-Hoon shrugs it off, reminding him that they aren't exactly old friends, so he shouldn't be expecting any charity. Sungha takes the point and taps his spear against his shoulder, seriously considering the price of this alliance. He makes a vow. If Se-Hoon helps him become the sect leader, he'll follow him into every one of those demon realms. He promises to kill every demon god in their path, demanding that Se-Hoon make him the weapon that can do it. Se-Hoon's smile widens, as he realizes the terms are more than acceptable for his long-term plans. He holds up a glowing red orb, asking if Sungha is really sure he won't regret making such a heavy commitment. Se-Hoon declares he'll make Sungha the sect leader, whether he likes it or not, as the Crimson Resonance Black Stone activates. Sungha reaffirms his side of the bargain, pledging his strength to Se-Hoon's cause in exchange for the leadership of the Flame Flower Gate. He challenges Se-Hoon to hold up his end and forge a weapon capable of taking down literal gods. Se-Hoon's smile remains as he prepares to activate the stone's full potential for the first time. He reiterates his promise to make Sungha a leader as the energy from the resonance stone flares up around him. The scene shifts to the Flavium Public Training Hall, where a large crowd has gathered for an important evaluation. Instructor Gang Hyeonun, a 7th wheel master from the Flame Flower Gate, arrives and greets Sungha with a mocking tone. Gang questions who the other disciples are, but quickly pivots to the leader's orders for a sparring match between him and the young master. He laughs condescendingly, calling himself the most outstanding member of the sect after the future leader. Sungha's expression turns ice gold as he warns the instructor to watch his tongue, reminding him that the succession isn't decided yet. Gang offers a fake, shallow apology, claiming he just had a momentary lapse in judgment. He asks if they should proceed with the standard skill assessment, but Sungha shuts him down with a flat no. Sungha declares that he isn't here for a simple checkup. He's requesting a promotion to the 7th wheel immediately. Sungha maintains a stoic expression, his eyes fixed forward despite the insults being hurled his way. A flashback reveals Michael Barmut, Warmut, a stern man with neatly styled silver hair and a sharp gray vest, ordering instructor Gang to deal with Sungha decisively. Gang continues his taunts, mocking Sungha's father while the young warrior tells him bluntly that he's talking too much. The instructor's composure cracks as he snaps at the young master, demanding his spear so he can settle things immediately. The terms are officially set, The 7th wheel promotion will be decided through a high-stakes domain sparring match. In this specific format, the victory goes to whichever warrior can manifest the more powerful and stable flame wheel. Sungha brings his black and red dual spears into a defensive cross, the weapons humming with an anticipation of battle. Gang scoffs at the unconventional weapons, dismissing the dual short spears as a crude and inefficient choice. Sungha doesn't waste words, launching himself forward in a blur of motion with a massive trail of fire surging behind him. Gang shouts that Sungha has forgotten his master's orders to suppress his dark mana, refusing to see the messy flames as a true flame wheel. Standing his ground as dark fire spirals around him, Sungha calmly states that the true test will happen once their weapons meet. Gang roars a final warning, convinced that the young master is about to learn a very painful lesson. The air explodes as their massive mana pools collide, sending jagged streaks of light and shadow across the training ground. The intensity of the clash creates a blinding sphere of energy at the point where their spears meet. Gang's smug expression is replaced by pure terror as he realizes his flames are being completely overwhelmed by something he doesn't recognize. The dark energy takes on a monstrous form, physically shredding Gang's flame wheel with terrifying efficiency. The structural integrity of Gang's weapon fails, the shaft beginning to splinter and crack under the sheer pressure. In a violent surge of power, the instructor's spearhead shatters into dozens of glowing fragments. Gang collapses to his knees in the center of the ring, staring blankly at the ruined remains of his pride. Sungha stands triumphantly over the fallen instructor, resting his spears on his shoulder while repeating Gang's earlier insult back to him. Se-Hoon watches from the sidelines as Sungha reflects on the fact that his victory here makes his status as instructor and successor official. After the match, Se-Hoon asks about the remaining steps required for Sungha to take full control of the sect as its leader. Sungha explains the daunting requirements. He must reach the 8th wheel and gain the majority approval of all current instructors. He acknowledges that future battles won't be as straightforward as today's domain match, but his resolve remains unshaken. Se-Hoon dismisses the difficulty, suggesting it won't take long, while Sungha notes how easy he makes it sound. Flashing a knowing smile, Se-Hoon reminds the future sect leader that he needs to start thinking about the price of his services. Sungha doesn't hesitate, promising to provide whatever cash or rare materials are needed for Se-Hoon's help. Se-Hoon is quick to follow up, revealing that he already has a new commission ready for the warrior to handle. Sungha looks down at his powerful new spears, realizing that Se-Hoon's talent as a smith is far beyond anything he's ever seen. He wonders what kind of incredible weapon Se-Hoon will create next as the young smith watches him with a calculative gaze. Sungha officially asks for an even more usable weapon, while Se-Hoon jokingly tells him to put the dangerous spears down. The scene shifts to the bustling interior of the Babel Academy auction house, filled with an air of wealthy expectation. On the main stage, a charismatic announcer welcomes the audience to the refining department's regular second-year auction. Se-Hoon is seated in the crowd next to Inao Erika, an elegant girl with long black hair and a floral kimono. He notes the surprisingly large turnout. Professor Kim Incheol, a dignified man with a full white beard and sharp eyes, is also among the notable figures in attendance. Se-Hoon spots Michael Barmut in the audience and wonders what kind of underhanded scheme the man is planning for this event. The announcer presents a white cloth called Seo Jumpo, a material woven from the fur of a legendary S-class white tiger. A demonstration begins on stage, testing the sharpness of a submitted sword against the notoriously resistant fabric. The blade strikes the white cloth with a heavy clang, showing that the material can withstand even high-level slashing attacks. The test is designed to expose weapons that have sacrificed durability and structural integrity for the sake of temporary cutting power. The auction officially kicks off with the introduction of Cadet Joseph's blue-horn sword as the first item for bidding. Se-Hoon observes the process with keen interest, while Inao Erika leans in to ask if he understands the hidden motive behind the test. Lee Se-Hoon explains the complex nature of the white tiger beast, noting that its hide and bones possess different mystical properties. He highlights that the fur is particularly dangerous because it mimics the sharpness of any metal it touches, effectively eating away at a weapon's durability. And now Erika realizes this test is a death trap for high-precision swords, yet she's stunned by Se-Hoon's eerie calmness. Se-Hoon smirks, fully aware of Michael Barmut's scheme. However, he knows his masterpiece will turn that trap into a total joke. The gavel strikes, ending the previous bid as the atmosphere turns electric for the day's final, most anticipated item. The announcer calls out item 36, the white light longsword forged by the first-year valedictorian Lee Se-Hoon. The demonstrator unleashes a powerful strike, the blade whistling through the air before colliding with the legendary Seo Jumpo cloth. The crowd gasps as the sword slices through the S-class fur-like paper, maintaining a flawless edge despite the fabric's corrosive properties. Michael Barmut stares in pure disbelief, his face twisting in rage as he watches his perfect trap get shattered by a mere freshman. Standing radiant on the pedestal, the white light longsword proves one thing: Se-Hoon's craftsmanship has officially defied all logic. Michael Barmut is left speechless by the sudden turn of events. Lee Se-Hoon makes his way onto the auction stage. He confidently steps up to the mic, asking the crowd for a brief moment of their time. He explains that a weapon designed around killing edge usually wouldn't stand a chance against high-tier materials. But his blade is different. It pulls mana from the air and compresses it into a razor-sharp second layer. He demonstrates the killing edge, showing off a glow that's far too sharp to be mere light. And now Erika watches from her seat, wondering if this technique was behind the sword's earlier performance. Se-Hoon confirms it, explaining that when two identical edges meet, they resonate instead of canceling out. He holds out a piece of crystallized mana, promising that killing edge can do even more. A system window reveals the details of Inao Erika's high-grade, tuning stone bond. Se-Hoon grips the hilt, activating the bond to correct the blade's internal mana arrays. The erratic mana patterns on the sword begin to shift and align under his control. He focuses his energy, knowing he just needs to create one clear path for the mana to flow. With a single glowing strike, the transformation of the weapon is complete. A notification pings. The white light greatsword has officially evolved into a rare-grade weapon. The upgraded stats show a sword filled with pure white mana, now capable of killing-edge amplification. Se-Hoon smugly points out that a standard whetstone could never achieve an edge this perfect. He casually turns to the auctioneer and tells him to reflect this change in the starting bid. The auctioneer doesn't miss a beat, jacking up the price from 1 million won to 5 million. Inao Erika's interest is piqued now that the weapon has jumped to rare grade. The bidding war explodes as offers fly in from all over the room, quickly crossing the 100 million mark. Jake Myers gets aggressive, shouting out a bid of 200 million won. Erika doesn't blink, calmly raising the price to 210 million. The auctioneer keeps the energy high, taunting the crowd about going home empty-handed. Jake throws out 300 million, but Erika immediately counters with 310. Se-Hoon watches the numbers climb, amused by how casually the Ultrich throw around a small fortune. Then a massive bid of 600 million won hits the table, silencing the entire room. Jake was left speechless, remembering his sister's urgent demand to secure this weapon at any cost. The Borsapa department head looks on with a predatory gaze, thinking the current bid is still too low. The tension is palpable as a whale officially enters the bidding war. Jake slumps in his seat, looking defeated as Erika also feels the pressure. It's all over. The white light greatsword is sold for a mind-blowing 600 million won. Later on, Se-Hoon checks his phone to see the full balance successfully transferred to his account. The Borsapa department head walks into a private room where Se-Hoon is waiting. He confirms the transaction went through and tells her he plans to test the sword in a danger zone. She toys with her cane, commenting that using such a high-tier weapon for mere training is a waste. She suggests he take it to Silver Moon Mountain, a prime spot for the upcoming student drills. Se-Hoon considers the suggestion over tea, thinking that a little preparation might be helpful. The department head goes quiet for a moment, weighing the implications for her own position. Se-Hoon offers to forge her a custom weapon in exchange for the advice, which makes her check her calendar. He smiles to himself, knowing his thank you was the perfect excuse to move his plans forward. A final note highlights Jurgen Kruger, the world's most powerful summoning sorcerer. Flashback to Se-Hoon's past life. An ambush by a demon soldier during the brutal Myriad Demon War. Visual of Silver Moon Mountain, the hidden location where one of the artifacts he lost that day still remains. In the present, Jake Myers stands before his sister's shadow, waiting for her reaction. Arya Myers smiles, nodding with a hint of condescension that he failed to recover the weapon. Jake apologizes profusely, but Arya is already looking ahead to their next move. She reminds him of their shared class and tells him to keep a close eye on their target. She promises to help him with the succession ceremony if he manages to handle this situation properly. Her gaze turns sharp, warning Jake that he's in danger of losing his top rank if he continues like this. Jake clenches his fist, realizing he can't afford any more mistakes before graduation. He vows to bring back a sword from Lee Se-Hoon, promising to do whatever it takes. Arya teases him for his sudden outburst, forcing another quick apology from her brother. She laughs and tells him to go for it, enjoying the sight of his newfound determination. She has a smug, confident look as she watches him prepare to leave the office. She watches from her window, thinking about how much Se-Hoon irritates her. Arya keeps a close eye on Se-Hoon as he walks away, finding his presence grating. A close-up of Arya, her expression unreadable as she contemplates the upcoming academic term. Se-Hoon presents his latest project to Reese Doba and Kim Incheol, finally finishing the two spears. The Crimson 1 and Black 10 spears are revealed as high-grade weapons with impressive quality. Reese Doba is genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship and the internal mana formulas. He explains how the spears are designed to repel mana and warn the user of improper technique. Reese Doba nods, praising the weapons as perfect training tools for any aspiring spearman. Kim Incheol awards Se-Hoon a perfect score and grants him an official exemption from attendance. The surrounding students whisper in shock, nodding that Se-Hoon could practically graduate right now. Se-Hoon bows and takes his leave, with Reese Doba telling him to keep the spears for himself. Se-Hoon walks through the courtyard with the spears on his back, heading to Ma Guangsu's class. Inside the training hall, Jake Myers is already stretching and preparing for his own session. Jake is surprised to see Se-Hoon arrive so early, asking if he has a class now as well. Jake offers to leave if Se-Hoon needs the space, but he's clearly trying to find an opening to talk. He attempts to ask for a favor, but Se-Hoon's cold expression already signals the answer. Se-Hoon immediately refuses, not even giving Jake a chance to explain himself. He calls Jake out, knowing his sister Arya is the one who really wants the weapon. Se-Hoon knows that a subpar weapon would only make legendary heroes like Arya lose interest in him. Seeing that words aren't working, Jake reaches into his bag for a different kind of persuasion. He pulls out the Hammer of Black Flames, a hero-grade artifact with mid-high quality. The hammer is forged from refined dragonite, crackling with fire and dark attribute mana. Se-Hoon inspects the artifact, nodding that while it's a decent piece, there's still room for improvement. Jake proposes a spar, wagering the hero-grade hammer on the condition that Se-Hoon helps his sister. Se-Hoon's gaze sharpens as he silently weighs the risk and reward of the duel. He accepts but adds his own condition. If he wins, Jake can't mention Arya for a month. The spar begins, with Se-Hoon standing ready with his twin spears as Jake prepares to strike. Jake clenches his fist, blue mana swirling violently as he prepares to go all out from the start. Se-Hoon is impressed by the level of mana compression, recognizing the power Jake used in their last encounter. Se-Hoon focuses, his red eye glowing as he prepares to shift his power. He reaches for the social link stone on his wrist, a tool that allows him to tap into the strength of others. A system notification confirms that Inao Erika's bond imprint has been deactivated, replaced by Ryu Yunha's Gluttony Iron. His mana fluctuates, adjusting itself to an optimal state for the coming strike. He tightens his grip on the shaft of the short spear, his knuckles white against the dark wood. The weight of the weapon feels perfect in his hand as he prepares to show Jake Myers the true meaning of a duel. Jake is caught off guard by Se-Hoon's stance, noting how naturally he handles the short spear. He realizes that being a blacksmith doesn't mean Se-Hoon is only proficient with a hammer. Jake shifts his weight, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor of the training hall. He warns Se-Hoon that relying on a familiar weapon won't be enough to overcome his superior technique. With a sudden burst of speed, Jake lunges forward, a trail of sparks marking his explosive movement. He's determined to prove that his rank as the top student isn't just for show. The two clash in the center of the room, blue and red mana exploding outward as they exchange blows. Jake shouts that he won't be pushed around so easily this time. Se-Hoon remains calm, his eyes tracking every movement of Jake's mana-infused limbs. He's waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the hidden power of his new spear. Jake grins, thinking he's finally cornered the elusive blacksmith. He yells out that victory is already within his grasp. Suddenly, a small, intense flame flickers into existence in the darkness between them. The air around Se-Hoon begins to shimmer with an oppressive heat. Jake flinches as a massive wave of fire attribute mana erupts from Se-Hoon's spear. He's stunned by the sudden change in atmosphere, wondering what kind of technique he's witnessing. Se-Hoon whispers the name of the technique, Flame Wheel Ember Spear. A crimson aura surrounds him, the silhouette of a legendary warrior appearing briefly behind him. Se-Hoon recalls his past life and the stories he heard from the legendary trio known as Samjun. At first, he only sought to raise his bond level with them for his own benefit. But once they truly opened up to him, they shared forbidden techniques that had never been passed down to anyone else. He sees their silhouettes in his mind, a reminder of the legends they once were. He remembers the face of a hero with glowing red eyes who once told him he had no talent for martial arts. Back then, he was insulted and criticized for his pathetic attempts at mimicry. Even though those words still sting, Se-Hoon knows he can at least manage a crude imitation of their power for now. He channels the fire into his spear, the tip glowing like a branding iron. He swings the spear in a wide arc, a ribbon of fire following the movement of the blade. The heat is so intense that the wooden floorboards begin to smoke and char beneath them. Jake is forced back, his eyes wide as he realizes he's been on the defensive ever since he lost the flow of the fight. He feels like he's being dragged around by Se-Hoon's every whim. Jake grits his teeth, trying to rationalize what he's seeing. He assumes that Se-Hoon's incredible physical abilities are merely the result of a temporary skill. He watches Se-Hoon's flaming spear intently, looking for any sign of an opening. He decides that if he can just stall until the skill's effect wears off, he can turn the duel around. Jake leaps back, keeping his distance to buy himself some time. He doesn't realize that Se-Hoon has already seen through his plan. Se-Hoon smirks, impressed that Jake figured out that stalling would be his best option. He acknowledges that the blonde student has good instincts, as expected of the Academy's top student. Deciding to end the fight quickly, Se-Hoon activates the mana stored in the Ink Spider bracelet from Yom Sungha. A surge of dark, purple mana twists around his arm and spear. Explosive ring, Se-Hoon announces as he thrusts the spear forward. The combination of fire and dark mana creates a terrifying, unstable energy that threatens to consume everything in its path. Jake is horrified by the sight, having heard that Se-Hoon only uses fire attribute mana. He thinks Se-Hoon is doing something suicidal by mixing such volatile energies. Desperate to survive the coming impact, Jake claps his hands together, his blue mana flaring up in a final, frantic defense. He knows he can't afford to take this hit head-on. Jake unleashes the Myers-style formless sword, Blue Axis. A pillar of brilliant blue light erupts between them, serving as both a shield and a counterattack. He follows up with Light Thread, thin filaments of mana that weave through the air to entangle Se-Hoon's spear. It's a high-level technique that showcases Jake's true potential. Se-Hoon watches the blue mana threads wrap around his weapon, completely unbothered. He simply comments that the move is not bad, his tone dismissive. The silhouette of a blood-red moon appears behind Se-Hoon as he decides to stop holding back. He admits to himself that he can't afford to lose this wager. He unleashes his ultimate move, Flame Wheel Ember Spear, Eclipse Crescent. Lunging low, he coalesces black and red mana into a lethal edge. With one powerful sweep, a massive crescent wave erupts, devouring Jake's mana and turning the hall into a whirlwind of fire and shadow. The sound of the impact is deafening, blue and red sparks flying like shards of broken glass. The sheer force of the technique sends a shockwave through the entire building. As the dust begins to settle, shards of mana still hang in the air, shimmering before they dissipate. The intensity of the clash has left the training floor scarred and blackened. Se-Hoon stands tall, his profile illuminated by the fading glow of his technique. He looks completely unfazed, his breathing calm despite the massive amount of mana he just expended. Jake is left breathless, sweat pouring down his face as he stares at Se-Hoon in utter disbelief. He realized in that final moment that the gap between them was far wider than he ever imagined. Se-Hoon pulls his spear back as the dust settles from their duel. Jake Myers stands opposite him, still processing how the match ended so abruptly. A system window pops up, confirming a level 1 bond has been established with Jake Myers. The blonde fighter lowers his guard and admits his defeat. Se-Hoon isn't one to brag. He looks back and asks if it wasn't just a draw, since they both reached each other at the same time. Jake rubs the back of his neck, looking a bit tired. He admits that considering Se-Hoon used a near-fatal skill, he's the one who's technically defeated. He looks down at his hand with a frustrated scowl. He wishes he could just use a sword like a normal person, but things aren't that simple for him. Se-Hoon looks genuinely curious as he holds his tools. He asks why a guy with Jake's power can't just pick up a blade and go to town. Jake gives a half-hearted laugh, sweat beading on his forehead. He explains that he's even shattered hero-grade swords just by holding them because they can't handle his mana. Se-Hoon's analytical side takes over. He reaches out and tells Jake to extend his right hand so he can take a closer look at what's going on. Jake is confused but holds his hand out anyway. Se-Hoon warns him to relax his hand and keep his mana perfectly still, or he might end up getting hurt during the inspection. Se-Hoon's eyes glow with an intense golden light. Jake starts to freak out, wondering what the hell is about to happen to his arm. A sharp shockwave hits Jake's hand, forcing a pained grunt out of him. The impact is sudden and violent, echoing through the training hall. Se-Hoon watches the energy ripples with a focused gaze. He realizes Jake's mana doesn't just reinforce weapons, it physically alters the internal structure of the material itself. Jake pulls his hand back, looking completely annoyed. He demands to know what that was all about before Se-Hoon does anything else. Se-Hoon stays cool and calm, ignoring the outburst. He simply asks Jake if he'd like him to forge a sword that won't break when he uses it. The system begins extracting a unique material from Jake. A glowing blue shard appears as the bond with the legendary student solidifies at level 1. It's the Jake Myers compression stone, a high-grade ore with superior quality. This stuff can endlessly compress mana, making it the perfect base for an indestructible weapon. Se-Hoon clenches his fist, a satisfied smirk crossing his face. He promises Jake a blade that even he won't be able to shatter, no matter how hard he tries. A sudden chime rings out, catching Se-Hoon's attention. He looks toward the entrance, sensing a heavy presence approaching. A massive figure looms in the doorway, casting a long, intimidating shadow. It's Professor Ma Guangsu, and the system immediately marks him as a new bond target. Ma Guangsu's eyes narrow as he stares down Se-Hoon. He tells Jake to step outside for a moment, making it clear he needs a private talk with the freshman. Jake doesn't need to be told twice and quickly makes his exit. The heavy doors slam shut with a loud thud, leaving Se-Hoon alone with the stern professor. Ma Guangsu doesn't beat around the bush. He points out how weird it is that Se-Hoon is both a master blacksmith and a top-tier spearman at the same time. He stands with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable and dangerous. He tells Se-Hoon to answer his questions carefully so there aren't any misunderstandings. Se-Hoon remains remarkably composed under the pressure. He realizes the professor's suspicion comes from his combat stance being a little too perfect for a rookie. To cover his tracks, Se-Hoon pulls out a small mana crystal as a prop. He dismisses his skill as a cheap trick he developed to mimic other people's movements. A blue aura flares around Se-Hoon as he demonstrates his mimicry ability. He explains that he's essentially forcing his muscles to rearrange themselves to match a target's body. Once the aura fades, Se-Hoon returns to normal, showing that the effect is only temporary. Ma Guangsu watches with wide eyes, clearly taken aback by the explanation. The professor asks if there are any limits to this strange talent. Se-Hoon lies, saying it takes a long time to observe a target and puts a massive amount of physical strain on his body. Ma Guangsu mumbles to himself, trying to make sense of what he just saw. He's comparing Se-Hoon's explanation to the dark rumors he knows all too well. He finally sighs and relaxes his posture, apologizing for being so suspicious. He admits he overreacted because of a specific demon that has a very similar ability. The name on everyone's mind is the Doppelganger. It's a title that brings chills to even the most seasoned hunters. This creature is one of the 10 evils of the Pandemonium. It's a master of disguise and mimicry that sows chaos wherever it goes. It loves to copy an opponent's martial arts and use them to kill them. It's a vicious monster responsible for ending the legacies of countless heroes. A grim image shows the doppelganger standing over a fallen warrior from Ma Guangsu's past. The professor clearly has a deep, personal grudge against this thing. The rage is plain to see on Ma Guangsu's face as he remembers the encounter. Se-Hoon realizes this shared hatred for demons is why their bond formed so quickly. Ma Guangsu closes his eyes, seemingly satisfied with the lie for now. Se-Hoon wonders if the professor actually believes him or if he's just decided that he's too useful to let go. Se-Hoon maintains his polite facade, nodding in agreement. He says it's perfectly understandable to be cautious when demons are involved. Suddenly, the professor lets out a booming laugh, the tension in the room vanishing instantly. He slaps his knee, finding the whole situation hilarious now that he's convinced. He keeps laughing, mocking modern heroes for being too soft and lacking any real awareness of the demon threat. Se-Hoon just watches him, keeping his thoughts to himself. Ma Guangsu wipes his nose, still grinning from ear to ear. He admits that after seeing Se-Hoon's skill, he's going to have to completely overhaul his teaching methods. As Se-Hoon walks away, the professor watches him go with a thoughtful expression. He thinks Se-Hoon could easily be the valedictorian of the entire academy if he actually gave a damn. He stands alone, his eyes following Se-Hoon out the door. He can't help but wonder why a kid with this much potential would lie about having such a humble family background. Lee Se-Hoon walks through the academy halls, his mind already calculating his next move. A sharp vibration from his phone breaks his concentration. It's Yom Seong-ha on the line. The protagonist picks up, expecting the intel he asked for earlier. Seong-ha is anxious to settle his debt, but Se-Hoon tells him to relax. He points out it's only been a day and there's no need to rush the payment yet. The conversation shifts as Se-Hoon asks about a specific person, a Babel mage named Louise Valent. He tells the man on the other end to quietly find her location and figure out what she's been doing. Seong-ha admits he's never heard of anyone by that name. When questioned about his own connections, Se-Hoon just gives a smug retort. He asks if his associate is really underestimating the depth of his reach. He knows that in his current state, most people see him as broke and powerless within the Flame Flower Gate. He tells his contact to just trust the process and wait for the results. After the call ends, he wonders what kind of person Louise has become in the present. Louise Valent, infamously known as the Explosive Dog, was a volatile force in the past. She wasn't a household name like the others, but she was a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. His phone buzzes again with an update. He knows her abrasive personality is a result of a tragic injury, and he needs to catch her at exactly the right moment. To his surprise, the information comes in almost instantly. He's impressed by how quickly the search was completed. The files reveal that Louise was the salutatorian of the Elemental Department. She was considered one of the most promising cadets until her career was cut short. A horrific accident during a spar 6 months ago ruined her life when her wand unexpectedly exploded. The blast permanently fried her mana circuit, leaving her unable to cast. Se-Hoon stands in the quiet corridor, absorbing the weight of the girl's misfortune. She's currently wasting away in rehabilitation with no hope of recovery. His source promises to send the full file over so he can see the details for himself. Just as he's finishing up, Jake Myers suddenly appears from around a corner, surprised to find him still there. The blonde fighter jogs over, clearly not done talking about the custom sword he was promised. Se-Hoon looks at the names involved in Louise's accident, Gertz Kruger and Pierre Barmut. He asks his companion if he knows anything about these two students. Jake explains that the two families are in-laws and high-ranking members of the exclusive Noblesse network. Se-Hoon offers a trade. If the blonde warrior investigates those families, he'll have his new sword ready in a week. The sheer speed of the forging process leaves Jake completely speechless. Eager to finally get a weapon that won't shatter, He agrees to do whatever is asked of him. Se-Hoon decides to put that loyalty to the test immediately. The excitement on Jake's face turns to pure shock in an instant. The request is simple but insane. He wants his arm broken. Se-Hoon holds out his limb with a deadpan expression, sweat beading on his brow from the tension. He tells the guy to make it a clean break. Se-Hoon is looking pretty satisfied with himself, talking about how he wants to get things done as cleanly as possible. This is General Hospital, Ascus, one of the best places for specialized care. Inside, a group of doctors is standing by, watching the latest experiment with plenty of skepticism. Louise Valent takes a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady her nerves for the task ahead. It's her 159th attempt. She used to be known as the explosive dog, but now she's just a patient struggling to cast a basic spell. She summons her mana to cast a lava bullet, and fire begins to swirl around her as she pushes her limits. The spell backfires immediately, and a sharp pain shoots through her neck like a hot iron. She collapses to the floor, gasping as her mana flows back into her body the wrong way. The system confirms a mana backflow. They have to initiate a mana freeze immediately before she tears herself apart. In her pain, she flashes back to the disaster that ruined her, the sirens, the smoke, and the feeling of everything falling apart. Professor Charles watches the failure coldly, telling his team to just sedate her and end the session. Louise stumbles toward him, desperately begging for a short break so she can try just one more time. Charles isn't moved at all. He tells her they're done for the day and needs to stop. He demotes her to beginner-level magic and cuts her training time significantly. Louise looks like her world is crumbling. She tries to go after him, but her body just won't listen. The medical staff have to physically restrain her, while she desperately screams for another chance. Charles doesn't even look back, just ordering the staff to give her the tranquilizer before she draws out any more mana. She's pinned to the floor, still shouting that she can do it as her vision starts to blur. Everything goes black. Another failed day, another heap of self-loathing. She wakes up later to the bright sunlight streaming through her hospital window. Louise stares up at the ceiling, her eyes completely drained of hope. She lies there for a while, cursing herself out for being so pathetic. She knows she blew it by throwing a tantrum and losing her cool in front of the professor. She finally sits up, realizing she needs to find another way to fix her mana if these experiments are a dead end. She heads out into the hallway, probably needing to move around to clear her head. But she isn't looking where she's going and slams right into someone. She clutches her nose, already losing her temper. It's Se-Hoon she bumped into, and he just stands there, staring at her with an intense look. Se-Hoon is momentarily pulled back into a memory of a massive explosion and an air raid alert. He remembers the smoke and the sound of everyone around him coughing in the chaos. It was a situation where he really thought his life was over. Through the haze, he saw someone running away while the sirens blared. There was a masked figure standing in the middle of the destruction, someone he knew was dangerous. The figure leaped into the air and vanished as if they were never there. Se-Hoon knew that person had to be at least A-class to pull off a move like that. That woman can walk on air, but even more frighteningly, she's landing right next to you. She's glaring holes into him, demanding to know what he's looking at. Back to the present, that dangerous woman is right there in front of his eyes, but dressed in a hospital gown. She starts shouting at him, telling him he should apologize for bumping into her. He doesn't even flinch, just keeps staring at her with those unreadable eyes. Suddenly, Louise's body gives out and she drops to her knees, coughing violently. Se-Hoon looks down at her and says if she's sick, she should be resting instead of wandering around. He offers to help her back to her room, but she just stays silent, trying to catch her breath. Louise is freaking out internally, worried that if she gets caught out of bed, she'll be confined to her room for good. She looks at Se-Hoon with absolute disdain, thinking a guy like him would normally be beneath her notice. Se-Hoon doesn't even acknowledge her glare, just walking past her with a calm and measured pace. He stops and asks if she needs help with anything. Louise just stares back, clearly wanting him to disappear so she can get back to her room. He gestures toward the dresser and tells her she'll find a black case in the top drawer. Louise is already starting to cough again, her throat feeling like it's closing up. She grabs the small box. looking at it with a mix of suspicion and pure desperation for some relief. Se-Hoon tells her to just use it so he can leave, but Louise snaps at him to stop being so nosy. She reminds him that they literally just met and she doesn't need his help. She takes a deep puff from the inhaler, letting out a long, shaky breath as she waits for it to kick in. Se-Hoon watches her with an intense, unblinking gaze, nodding every reaction to the device. He asks her why she's hurting herself when she's supposed to be in recovery. Louise looks at him like he's grown a second head, completely caught off guard by the question. She dismisses him immediately, telling him he's talking absolute nonsense. Se-Hoon doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells her that the inhaler she just used is actually destroying her throat. Louise freezes, looking down at the device in her hand with an expression of growing shock. She looks back up at him, her eyes wide as she tries to figure out if he's serious or just insane. Se-Hoon points right at the inhaler, emphasizing that it's a poison disguised as a cure. "What did you say?" she whispers, her voice barely audible through her confusion. Her confusion quickly turns into a cold, sharp anger, and she demands he repeat himself. She can't stand the idea that her trusted medicine might be a lie. Se-Hoon meets her gaze with total confidence, repeating exactly what he said without flinching. Before things can escalate, a loud hospital announcement calls for Lee Se-Hoon to report to the nursing station immediately. Se-Hoon realizes his time is up for now and starts to head for the door. He confirms his identity to her one last time before dropping a final bombshell. Keep using that thing, and she'll be magically disabled forever. Louise screams at him to get out, calling him a lowly blacksmith who has no right to talk to her like that. Se-Hoon just shrugs and leaves, the door clicking shut behind him as he heads to the nursing station. Louise is left alone in the dark, curled up on her bed and fuming about the strange encounter. Outside, Se-Hoon sees a system message pop up. He's officially established a bond with Louise Valent. Se-Hoon is now sitting with the doctor, looking a bit surprised that everything is going according to plan. The doctor confirms the bone break was clean and should heal in a week, with no damage to his mana circuits. Se-Hoon asks about his discharge, and the doctor suggests staying another week just to be safe. Se-Hoon realizes he can milk this stay for at least 2 weeks. That's more than enough time for him to close the distance with Louise and start working on her mana circuits. But first, he has to find a way to get rid of that mana eroder, inhaler she's been using. He casually asks the doctor if he knows Louise Valent, acting like he's just curious about a fellow patient. The doctor admits he's treating her, so Se-Hoon decides to snitch. He tells the doctor he saw her having a seizure in the hallway while trying to use magic. The doctor looks genuinely concerned, while Se-Hoon plays the role of the dutiful, worried student perfectly. The doctor thanks him for the information and tells him he can go. Se-Hoon walks out with a satisfied look, thinking perfect. The next morning, a bright light fills Se-Hoon's hospital room as the sun comes up. He's woken up by his phone vibrating. It's a call from Jake. He picks up immediately, asking for the intel he requested the day before. Jake says he found some very suspicious details surrounding the incident that ruined Louise's career. He explains that Babel's Ivory Tower is a sponsorship foundation that holds massive power over the Academy's students. Every year they pick scholarship recipients, and a guy named Gotts Kruger was a top contender at the time. The only person standing in his way was the former genius mage, Louise Valent. Jake explains how the Barmut family provided Louise with a sabotaged weapon that exploded during her match, clearing the way for Gotts. It's a clear conspiracy between Gotts and the Barmuts to take Louise down. Se-Hoon realizes that even the inhaler is part of a much bigger, uglier picture. Outside the hospital, Jake continues his report over the phone, mentioning there's one more thing that's been bothering him about the investigation. He reveals that Professor Charles from the Elemental Department has gone out of his way to personally sponsor and help Louise with her serious injuries. Se-Hoon listens with a grim expression, thinking that while it sounds like a heartwarming story, something feels deeply wrong about the situation. He thanks Jake for the info and prepares to hang up. Jake suddenly shouts for him to wait, desperately asking for a favor as his voice trembles with anxiety. He explains that Erica and Yom Sungha are giving him terrifying death glares, and asks Se-Hoon to let them know he's actually doing fine. Se-Hoon just ignores the request and hangs up, leaving Jake to deal with the angry friends on his own. He isn't interested in being a messenger right now. He looks at his phone, seeing a string of messages from Yom Sungha demanding to know what's going on. The guy clearly isn't satisfied with a short answer. He realizes he doesn't even have Erica's phone number yet as he walks down the quiet hospital hallway toward room 202. He decides it's better to just deal with everyone later. He dismisses the social drama for now and knocks firmly on the door to room 202. He has a much more pressing matter to attend to. From inside, Louise asks who it is. Se-Hoon answers calmly, identifying himself as the person who helped her out the day before. The door flies open and Louise immediately lunges at him, grabbing his hospital gown with a look of pure fury on her face. She's clearly been waiting for him. She slams him against the wall with surprising strength, her eyes burning with a mix of rage and desperation as she traps him there. Se-Hoon just stares back, unbothered by the aggression. She screams at him, calling him a son of a bitch as her voice echoes throughout the entire building and scares the birds outside. The intensity of her anger is palpable. Se-Hoon keeps his cool despite being pinned, asking her why she's suddenly cursing him out when he's just arrived. He wants to get to the point. Louise is fuming because his help led to the doctor discovering her secret practice session. Now, she's been ordered to take 2 weeks of absolute rest, effectively ruining her rehab progress. She yells about how hard she's worked on that rehab for the past half-year and how his meddling has made all that effort go to waste. She's on the verge of tears from the frustration. Se-Hoon cuts through her tantrum, bringing up the inhaler from yesterday and asking if she used it again after his warning. He knows exactly where the real problem lies. He drops a bombshell, telling her that the mana burns she thinks are incurable can actually be fixed. The declaration leaves Louise completely stunned. Louise scoffs at the claim, asking if he even knows what a mana burn is since even the most powerful summit climbers can't cure them. She thinks he's just playing with her. She stops her shouting for a moment, deciding to hear what kind of nonsense this blacksmith is about to spew. Her skepticism is still high, but she's listening. Se-Hoon walks over to the cabinet, saying they have a lot to discuss if she actually wants to get better. He reaches for something inside. He pulls out the inhaler and asks her point-blank who she got it from. Louise hesitates for a second before admitting it was a gift from a professor she trusts. Se-Hoon stares at the device with a cold look, calling it by its true name, the Mana Eroder. It's not medicine, it's a weapon. Louise is confused by the term, but Se-Hoon promises it will take time to explain and offers to show her exactly what it's doing to her body. He needs her to see the truth. A blue system window appears as Se-Hoon activates his S-Rank skill, Divine Spirit Link Magic. A faint glow begins to emanate from his hand. He explains the problem using a simple analogy, telling her to think of her mana circuits like an electrical system, originally built for 110 V. He's breaking down complex magic into something she can grasp. Louise watches intently, her eyes wide as he uses his magic to reveal the hidden damage within her own mana path. She's never seen anyone analyze a circuit like this. He points out that the circuit in her neck area has been artificially changed to 220 V by the inhaler's cumulative effects. The mismatch is destroying her from the inside. This creates a constant conflict that leads to a total mana overload, making it impossible for her to ever cast spells safely again. The treatment was actually the cause of her ruin. Louise clutches her throat, the realization of what's been happening finally sinking in as she gasps in shock. The truth is far more terrifying than the disease. She has a sudden flashback to the day Professor Charles handed her the inhaler, claiming it would be extremely effective for her wounds. He looked every bit the concerned mentor. In the memory, she bows and thanks him, completely trusting the man she thought was her only ally left in the world. She had no reason to suspect him. He had placed a hand on her shoulder, his face shadowed and unreadable as he played his role to perfection. He was leading her right into a trap. Charles told her she would eventually overcome her mana burns if she just kept using the medicine and never gave up on herself. Every word was designed to keep her poisoned. Louise had smiled back then, grateful for the encouragement from someone she respected so much. She thought he was the one helping her hold onto her dreams. Back in the present, Se-Hoon watches her reaction, knowing that the professor was just toyed with her life for his own amusement. The cruelty of the plan is finally laid bare. Louise seethes with a newfound rage, her teeth gritted as she swears an oath to make the man who betrayed her pay for everything he's stolen from her. The fire in her eyes has returned, but this time it's for revenge. Ryu Yunha grinds her teeth, swearing to Se-Hoon that she'll find a way to pay him back for all of this. Lee Se-Hoon just smirks, reminding her that he's just a blacksmith and doesn't have a miracle cure for her damaged mana circuits. He continues, saying that while he can't fix the damage directly, he can adjust things so she can actually use magic again. Yunha isn't naive. She knows a deal like this always comes with a heavy price tag. Se-Hoon lays it out for her. She can either trust him and change her fate, or just sit there and give up on her future. The choice is hers, and after a long moment of silence, she finally gives him a determined smirk. She holds out her hand to seal the deal, warning him not to go back on his word later. They shake on it, officially becoming partners in this unconventional plan. Se-Hoon pulls out the primary tool for their first session, a plastic bag full of fresh cherries. Yunha is immediately suspicious, wondering if this is some kind of weird eating show training instead of actual magic. Se-Hoon gets serious, asking her which kind of mana actually hurts her circuits the most when she tries to use it. He explains that while normal mana is fine, circulating refined mana through her broken body is the real problem. The million-dollar question is how she's supposed to use any magic without the standard refinement process. The answer, simple. She just has to refine the mana directly on the tip of her tongue. Yunha looks at him like he's lost his mind, completely baffled by the idea of using a part of her body with almost no circuits. She doubts anyone could actually pull off a stunt like that, but Se-Hoon remains confident. He points right at her, telling her that she's the only person in the world who can make it happen. In his past life, Yunha earned the terrifying title of Mad Dog, specifically by mastering this insane method. Ready to give it a shot despite the absurdity, she asks what the first step is. Se-Hoon starts the demonstration by tossing a cherry into his mouth, explaining they need to strengthen her mouth's mana circuits first. He shows off the basic form, a perfectly tied cherry stem sitting right on the end of his tongue. Yunha just stares at him, wondering how she's supposed to control mana that precisely to tie a knot. He tells her she can use her teeth to assist at first, since doing it with just the tongue is too tricky for beginners. Yunha is starting to think she didn't find a genius at all, but rather a complete and total lunatic. Pretty soon, the hospital is filled with her frustrated screaming as she struggles with the bizarre task. The training forces her to shout with all her might, pouring every ounce of emotion and mana into her voice. Next, she's forced to tackle complex tongue twisters while trying to keep her mana flow perfectly stable. She even has to bite down on a stick while talking, making it almost impossible to keep her pronunciation clear. A full week later, she finally nails it, showing off her own knotted cherry stem with a proud look. Se-Hoon is genuinely impressed. She finished in just 7 days, but Yunha acts like it was no big deal. But then it hits her. She's been doing nothing but shouting and eating cherries for a week. She has a total meltdown, realizing the only thing she's actually improved is her enunciation and wondering what this has to do with magic. After a second, she cools off and apologizes for the outburst, feeling a bit silly for snapping. She asks what the next knot is, and Se-Hoon just gives her a calm, satisfied nod. He tells her it's time to move on to the real deal, refining mana for something called word magic. Yunha jumps up in surprise, and Se-Hoon offers to give her a quick demonstration so she can see how it works. He explains that word magic only needs 2 essentials, a bit of mana to act as a core and a very strong will to manifest it. Yunha concentrates as she learns that the clearer she can visualize the magic in her mind, the stronger it becomes. Se-Hoon utters a single word, and a glowing sphere of blue energy manifests right in the middle of the room. He tells her to start small with a simple shape that's easy to cast while she's still learning. With another word, the mana transforms and crackles with elemental attributes, glowing brightly. He watches her closely, advising her to focus on increasing both the penetration and speed of the spell next. Yunha concentrates with everything she has, shouting acceleration as a violent surge of mana erupts from her body. The sheer force of the magic sends a shockwave through the room, forcing both Se-Hoon and Yunha to shield themselves from the blinding light. A massive explosion of blue energy, labeled New Star, detonates right in the center of the hospital wing with a deafening boom. The blast is so powerful that it completely shatters the hospital window, leaving a jagged, gaping hole in the wall. Se-Hoon quickly apologizes to the staff, waving his hand frantically as he promises to cover the cost of the destroyed window. Yoonha just stares at her hand in total shock, her fingers trembling slightly after feeling that insane level of power flow through her. A close-up reveals her intense, glowing blue eyes as she realizes she actually did it. She cast a high-level spell without any of her usual pain. Se-Hoon watches her with a calm expression, nodding to himself that she copied the visualization perfectly after seeing it just one time. To fix the mess, Se-Hoon casts a rebuild spell, manifesting a complex web of mana that immediately begins to repair the damaged room. He explains that magic is all about the power of imagery, which can even ignore the basic laws of the world if the vision is strong enough. Yoonha touches her throat, her eyes wide with disbelief as she confirms that casting New Star didn't cause her any pain at all. She mutters to herself that it really didn't hurt, feeling the bandages around her neck with a newfound sense of wonder. A look of pure relief and joy washes over her, as she realizes what it finally feels like to use her magic properly again after so long. Se-Hoon tells her she can cry if she wants to, but she quickly hardens her expression and pulls herself together. She refuses to shed a single tear until she's personally torn the throat out of every person responsible for the damage to her neck. Seeing her cold resolve, Se-Hoon decides it's finally time to move on to the next phase of her special training. Yoonha looks up, curious about what the next step could possibly be after such a massive breakthrough. Meanwhile, someone is busy registering a post on the Academy's public board, appropriately titled, Overcoming Trauma. The scene shifts to the Ivory Tower mock training grounds, where the relentless sound of clashing steel echoes through the arena. Several cadets are struggling in a frantic battle, wondering why the hell their practice opponent is so incredibly strong. Their opponent is revealed to be a terrifying skeleton warrior, shrouded in black robes and glowing with spectral blue mana. One of the cadets is sent flying back with a pained grunt, as the skeleton easily overpowers them with a single strike. Watching from the balcony, Pierre Barmut scoffs, dismissively calling the entire freshman class a bunch of worthless losers. He casually checks his phone while ignoring the chaos of the battle below, looking completely bored with the whole display. With a cold wave of his hand, Pierre tells the limping cadets to get lost and stop wasting any more of his time. As they leave, he stays on the phone with someone, asking for a detailed update on the current situation. A cadet approaches Gotts Kruger, informing him that a public challenge was just posted on the Tower Cafe board. He holds up the phone, showing a bold headline that is already racking up hundreds of views from curious students. Gotts slams his fist onto the desk in a blind rage, his face contorting as he curses the crazy bitch responsible for the post. He reads the message aloud, which is a direct callout from Louise Valent herself, calling him a coward and demanding a duel. A crowd of cadets gathers around a single phone, whispering about the post where Louise claims she's finally recovered from her injuries. Se-Hoon and Yoonha look over the post together, which explicitly requests a public duel with Gotts Kruger to settle an old debt. Gotts loses his mind, crushing his phone into pieces with his bare hand as he reads the final insult. Die if you're scared. Pierre Barmut glares at the broken device, feeling humiliated that anyone would dare to mock their family's name so publicly. He vows that no matter how she recovered, he's going to beat her so badly this time that she'll never stand up again. Back at the hospital, Se-Hoon stares at Yoonha in disbelief, asking if she's actually lost her mind by making the challenge so public. He looks down at his lunch tray, worried that forcing a confrontation like this will only end up worsening her trauma. Yoonha just dismisses his concerns, reaching out and telling him to stop talking nonsense and focus on the plan. Se-Hoon leans in, telling her that with the training they've done, there's absolutely no way she'll lose to a guy like Gotts. He begins the process of extracting a bond from her, causing a massive, glowing blue gemstone to manifest in the air before them. The Dying Water Stone is a supreme quality material that specializes the properties of mana imbued into any kind of ore. Yoonha just blinks in confusion, staring at the floating jewel as she tries to wrap her head around what Se-Hoon is doing. Yoonha exhales a long, relieved sigh before looking up at Se-Hoon with a spark of determination, asking what the next step of her training will be. Se-Hoon looks out the window at the clear sky, his expression calm but serious as he tells her it's time for an examination. He prepares himself for the next phase of his plan, his sharp eyes reflecting his deep concentration on the task ahead. Se-Hoon clarifies that it will be an oral examination, catching Yoonha completely off guard and leaving her with a look of stunned silence. She is clearly rattled by the sudden change in training, her internal thoughts screaming, "What the hell, you crazy bastard?" in disbelief. Yoonha tries to process his words, muttering that it is quite weird, while Se-Hoon just asks what specifically she's referring to. Outside on the academy grounds, a pair of students walk together, whispering about the suspicious accident that ruined Louis' Valence scholarship. One student speculates that the Barmut family conspired with the Krugers, nodding that Louise would have surely been the top student otherwise. Looking down from a high balcony, Pierre Barmut watches the students below with a look of pure disgust, muttering "pathetic fool" under his breath. In a shadowy office, a powerful figure, possibly Michael Barmut, spews insults over the phone, berating his listener for making such a public mess. Gotts Kruger is on the other end of the call, clutching the phone with a strained expression as he apologizes to his older brother. His brother coldly orders him to handle the fallout himself, threatening that any further intervention from the family will only make things worse. Gotts stares out the window, brooding over how his older brothers are likely thrilled to see him fail so they can seize his corporate affiliates. A dark aura of resentment surrounds him as he realizes he must personally eliminate the threat Louise poses to his standing. He mutters a frustrated curse, just as the reflection of Pierre Barmut appears in the glass behind him. Pierre greets him with a mockingly friendly tone, calling Gotts his best friend, while a cruel smirk plays across his face. Pierre's green eyes flash with cold intent as he asks if Gotts came here just to remind everyone they sabotaged that bug 6 months ago. He steps closer, aggressively pointing a finger and demanding that Gotts stop being a silent mute and say something to defend his latest failure. Gotts turns around, his expression hardened as he reminds Pierre that it was Pierre himself who decided to change the original plan. Pierre doesn't deny the accusation, simply stating it was his mistake before coldly demanding a solution to the Louise Valence problem immediately. He warns Gotts that unless he wants to be dragged out of the Barmut line of succession with him, he'd better act fast. A definitive, ruthless smile spreads across Pierre's face as he assures Gotts that he has a way to deal with her for good this time. An ominous image of a violent blood splatter suggests the lethal nature of the plan Pierre is currently formulating. Back at the hospital, Se-Hoon is fully focused, carefully examining the brilliant blue, dying water stone he extracted from Yoonha. He notes how the material has changed, now adapting itself to him rather than the other way around, glowing with an intense inner light. Se-Hoon pulls the blue, viscous material between his fingers, satisfied that it has become much more cooperative for the crafting process. He realizes that with this high-quality, supreme material, he can create an armament that far exceeds his original expectations. Yoonha notices that Se-Hoon's cast is finally off, her eyes wide with surprise as she sees the glowing stone in his hand. She asks if that's the special material he prepared, and Se-Hoon nods, asking if she's ready to start making the new item immediately. He instructs her to sit down and begin infusing the stone with her mana, telling her to continue until the color stops changing. Se-Hoon watches the process with a slight smile, nodding to himself that this is actually much simpler than he had initially thought. He recalls that in his past life, he had to focus so much on correcting errors, but now the materials themselves are incredibly supportive. He places his hand over a sleek metal plate, a specialized projection alloy that will serve as the base for the new equipment. With a focused burst of mana, he begins to spread the metal out into a perfect, thin square across the workspace. He then starts the delicate task of engraving complex mana circuits onto the surface, his incredible precision leaving Yoonha in awe. A bright light flares from his palm as he meticulously distributes the energy, ensuring every circuit is perfectly balanced and aligned. When the light finally fades, Yoonha asks if he's already finished, and Se-Hoon confirms it with a simple, confident nod. He hands her the dying water stone, telling her to carefully place it on top of the newly engraved mana plate. As the stone makes contact with the circuits, a sudden ripple of energy spreads across the table, reflecting in their eyes. A massive surge of blue mana erupts from the contact point, sending bright lines of power tracing through the complex circuit patterns. Yunha watches in wide-eyed silence as the item begins to take its final, powerful form amidst the swirling mana. A staggering array of high-tier attributes begins to manifest, including mana amplification, formula correction, and trajectory guidance. Floating windows display the impressive list of attributes for the new armament, including mana amplification, mana refinement, and pain relief. A text box clarifies that the dying water stone is essential for this build, as it compensates for the short duration of these effects by perfectly reflecting the user's imbued traits. Se-Hoon stands over the workstation, his hands glowing with a rainbow of mana as he finishes weaving 73 different incantations into the metal. Yunha watches in absolute awe, her single visible eye reflecting the brilliant, multicolored light of the nearly completed weapon. The mana-infused iron plates begin to fold and snap together, automatically assembling into a complex structure according to the circuit layout Se-Hoon designed. A bright digital notification appears in the air, announcing that the process is a success, and the armament Vargar has finally been completed. The item's profile reveals that Vargar is a rare rank armament of high quality, specially crafted to strengthen the user's will through their mana. The finished product is a sleek metallic choker. Yunha looks at the elegant item with a mix of wonder and disbelief, asking if it is really her armament. Yunha holds the choker excitedly and asks if she can try using it, but Se-Hoon warns her to use only the weakest magic possible since she won't have full control yet. In the hospital hallway, a doctor walks calmly with a cup in his hand, completely unaware of the explosive magical experiment happening in the next room. A massive, violent burst of mana suddenly erupts from the room, knocking the doctor back as a shockwave tears through the corridor and shatters the relative peace. The doctor peeks into the room with a horrified expression, seeing furniture overturned and Se-Hoon and Yunha standing amidst the swirling smoke of the discharge. Yunha offers a sheepish, embarrassed smile, while Se-Hoon rubs his head in frustration, reminding her that he specifically told her to be gentle with the new weapon. 1 week later, a crowd of students gathers at the Akalkup Martial Arts Hall, whispering about whether Louise Valent will actually show up for the challenge. Se-Hoon, now dressed in his Babel Academy uniform, considers leaving for a meal if the event ends up being a disappointment. He remembers Yunha's nervous warning for him not to come over and realizes he should probably find her to provide some encouragement before the fight begins. As he walks through the bustling hall, Se-Hoon's sharp amber eyes narrow as he detects a strange, high-pitched sound that others seem to ignore. He stops to look around, confirming that the odd vibration is audible only to him as it continues to echo through the corridor. Se-Hoon notes that the sound is getting clearer on the 3rd floor, realizing it has a dangerous resonance that is very similar to the phenomenon of mana erosion. Sensing that Louise might be the victim of a sabotage attempt, Se-Hoon sprints toward the source of the noise with a look of urgent concern. He tracks the sound to a warehouse located near Louise's waiting room, his hands clenching into fists as the high-pitched noise becomes deafening. With a powerful kick, Se-Hoon bursts through the door, ready to confront whatever trap has been laid for his ally. He enters the dimly lit room, his gaze falling upon a single, unassuming shipping box sitting in the middle of the floor amidst the shadows. As he stares at the suspicious container, a sinister voice mocks his efforts, calling his persistent struggle nothing more than a long-standing, pipe dream. Se-Hoon stops in his tracks, his eyes widening as a voice he hasn't heard in ages drifts through the darkness. From a sea of digital static, a tall woman with fiery red hair and a mocking smirk appears. This is the illusion of his master, a woman from his past life who seems to have manifested right in front of him. She looks down at the dagger in Se-Hoon's hand, asking how long he plans to keep up this childish prank. The world around them flickers with glitched memories of a bloody battlefield, while she laughs at the idea of him turning back time with such a trash weapon. She leans in with a patronizing smile, calling him disciple, and telling him to just shut up and listen for once. Spectral hands reach out from the shadows to grip his shoulders, as she describes the sweetness of a dream before the bitter realization that it holds no meaning. The illusion closes in, her hand tightening around his throat as the command to accept reality flares in the darkness. Her face becomes a distorted mask of jagged lines and static, screaming at him to stop his ugly struggling and just accept his death. Se-Hoon doesn't flinch, staring right through the phantom as he tells her there's just one thing she got wrong. He points out the biggest flaw in the deception. The real version of his master was never this long-winded when it was time for someone to die. Without a second of hesitation, Se-Hoon lashes out with a decisive strike against the fake. The entire illusion cracks and shatters like a broken mirror, the image of his master dissolving into nothingness. Behind the curtain, a mechanical device hidden in the room sparks and crumbles as the mana flow is violently cut off. Back in the silent warehouse, Se-Hoon lowers his glowing hammer with a heavy sigh. He's quietly fuming. Whoever had the balls to use his master's memory for a cheap trick like this just made a very powerful enemy. While searching through the clutter, Se-Hoon triggers a notification for a new grade C passive skill called Awakening Dream. It's a skill he's never even heard of, despite all the knowledge he brought back from his previous life. He decides to check the skill details later and focuses on a mysterious black artifact he pulled from one of the storage boxes. Suddenly, his amber eyes widen as he senses a subtle, high-pitched magical pulse vibrating through the ground. He quickly raises an arm to shield his face as a small flare of energy bursts from a hidden trap on the floor. Dropping to one knee, he clears the dust to reveal a disturbing symbol etched into the tiles where the pulse originated. It's the Mark of Dawn, a radical group of fanatical mages known for their dangerous extremist ideology and violent methods. Se-Hoon remembers how these bastards used Louise Valent as a puppet in his past life, forcing her to wear a mask and obey their every whim. Seeing their mark here confirms they've already started their plan to place a leash on her, just like they did before. He glances at the clock on the wall. There's only 10 minutes left before the duel is set to begin. If the remnants of mana erosion in his own body are reacting this strongly to the traces, Louise must be in serious trouble right now. Over in the combatants' waiting room, Louise stares blankly as a strange, high-pitched ringing starts to buzz inside her head. She's already incredibly nervous, and the persistent sound is quickly fraying what's left of her composure. Her hand goes to the bandage on her neck as the phantom pain of her injury returns. No matter how much she heals, she feels like everyone will always see her as nothing but a broken failure. She curls her fingers into fists, desperately trying to convince herself that she can actually go through with this. But looking at the jagged scar across her throat, she can't help but call herself pathetic for even trying. Suddenly, the green energy of her mana erosion begins to pulse and flare around her neck, triggered by the hidden device's frequency. The darkness of the room seems to bleed into a horrific flashback of the day she lost everything. She covers her face, the weight of her supposedly worthless talent crushing her resolve and pulling her deeper into the panic attack. Tears and blood seem to mix in her mind as the trauma takes full control of her senses. She collapses onto the floor, the vast arena around her feeling like a cold, empty stadium where she's already failed. In her hallucination, she sees a phantom of Se-Hoon standing over her, his face showing nothing but cold disappointment. She curls into a ball, begging for him not to look at her like that as she spirals further into despair. The door is suddenly kicked open, with a massive crash that snaps her out of the mental void. She looks up, startled, to see Se-Hoon himself standing in the doorway. He scans the room with a serious expression, seemingly relieved that he managed to reach her before any more traps could go off. He walks over and kneels in front of her, asking if she heard that high-pitched ringing sound just now. He tells her he destroyed the transmitter on his way over, and confirms it was a deliberate setup meant to sabotage her. The device was specifically designed to trigger her trauma by stimulating the mana erosion already present in her body. Louise stares at the floor, exhaling a shaky breath as she finally understands why she suddenly lost control. She says it's pathetic that she fell for such a basic trick at the most crucial moment of her life. Se-Hoon doesn't offer any comfort. He just looks at her with a bored face and agrees that it is quite pathetic. He mocks her for talking so big earlier only to end up mopping around on the floor when it matters most. He tells her that if taking responsibility for her words is too hard, she should just give up and run away. He even gives her a good excuse, telling her she can just blame her failure on her trauma while everyone watches her lose. He chuckles, saying it's funny how all that determination he saw in her eyes a few hours ago has just vanished. Louise's voice drops as she tells him to stop. He leans in closer, taunting her about how scary it must be to get crushed in front of a crowd all over again. That finally snaps something in her, and she screams at him to shut up while her eyes flare with anger. She lunges forward and pins him to the floor, grabbing a handful of his collar with a shaking fist. In a white-hot rage, she demands to know who he thinks he is to treat her trauma so lightly. She clenches her fist, her knuckles white as she glares down at him with murderous intent. She vents all her frustration, screaming that she's been trying her hardest not to break or run away, even when nothing seems to work out for her. Wide shot of her on top of him, pinning his shoulders to the ground as she calls him an arrogant bastard. Louise leans in close, yelling that if she loses this duel, he's going to be the one taking all the responsibility. Se-Hoon doesn't even blink, calmly telling her that he'll take it all on without hesitation. She pulls back slightly, her eyes wide as she's stunned by how easily he agreed to such a heavy demand. He looks her straight in the face and tells her the reason is simple. He doesn't fight losing battles anymore. He tells her there are only two things she needs to do. The first is to trust him until the very end. The second is to do her absolute best to bite her opponent to shreds. With those final instructions, the scene shifts to the massive Babel arena. Gotts Kruger stands ready with his dark, skeletal staff, mocking Louise for trying to protect her petty pride when she shouldn't even be able to use magic. In the stands, the other students are buzzing, recognizing Gotts's hero-grade armament and the fact that just one of those skeletons costs a fortune. Gotts laughs as he looks at the hooded figure across from him, convinced that the match is already decided. The overhead announcement signals that the duel is about to begin. Hidden under her hood, Louise thinks to herself that both her scar and this opponent are much more pathetic than she remembered. She declares that she's been waiting 6 months for this exact moment as a massive aura of blue mana begins to swirl around her. As the countdown reaches 2, an explosion of ice blue energy erupts from her body, shaking the arena floor. Gotts's jaw drops in shock. He can't understand how she's manifesting this much mana when her circuits were supposed to be ruined. As the final second ticks away, Louise's mechanical mask and glowing eyes mark her complete transformation. Panicked by the sudden pressure, Gotts screams at his skeletons to kill her right now. Louise readies her attack, the skill set, manifesting as dark energy around her arm. The skeletal summons lunge forward, their scythes raised to strike at the girl in the mask. She calls out the skill Death Bite and throws a punch packed with concentrated mana. In a single, fluid motion, she tears right through the summons, shattering the expensive skeletons into bone fragments. The remains of Gotts's summons litter the arena floor as the dust starts to settle. Gotts stares at the wreckage, unable to believe that his hero-grade armament was dealt with so easily. He desperately tries to channel more mana into his staff, hoping he can just restore them and get them moving again. But Louise is already right in his face, her speed completely catching him off guard as she closes the distance. A massive impact slams into his defensive barrier, the force of it making the entire arena shudder. Gotts clutches his neck, realizing that if it weren't for the arena's safety mechanisms, his head would have been sent flying. He curses under his breath, wondering if Pierre intentionally gave him the wrong information. Realizing his life is on the line, he focuses everything he has on reinforcing his protective barrier. Louise looks at him with cold, uncaring eyes, simply nodding that his defense looks fairly sturdy. Terrified, Gotts throws up a hand and tries to surrender before she can strike a second time. But Louise isn't listening. She presses her hand against the barrier, mana sparking violently at the point of contact. The air around them crackles as she prepares to shatter his final line of defense. Her eyes glow brighter through the mask as she channels the full weight of her resolve into the next strike. She unleashes Revenge Bite, a devastating blow that tears through the barrier and strikes Gotts directly. The attack rips through Gotts's internal systems, shattering his mana circuits one by one. He tries to stay on his feet, but his legs buckle as the catastrophic damage to his core takes effect. Gotts collapses onto the arena floor, his staff clattering away as he loses consciousness. The announcement rings out across the stadium. The winner of the duel is Louise Valent. A heavy silence falls over the crowd as they look down at the decisive victory in the center of the pit. Louise looks down at her defeated bully, her expression unreadable behind the mechanical mask. She stands over him, sending a silent warning to anyone else who might be thinking about messing with her. The scene shifts away from the arena to the quiet exterior of the Academy's medical facility. Gotts Kruger lies unconscious in a hospital bed, his breathing assisted by a mask. A medical notification reveals the extent of the damage. 38 of his mana circuits have been destroyed, rendering him incapable of ever using magic again. The unknown official stands by the bed, his expression stern as he informs the Borsapa top student that the complaints from the UD group and Dawn are becoming quite serious. The blonde student bows his head slightly, offering a brief apology for the failure of his subordinate. The official looks at him with cold eyes, assuming that since things have come to this, the student already has a solution prepared. The Borsapa top student looks up, his expression hardening as he prepares to outline his next move against their common enemies. He states his plan to deal with Louise Valent once she enters the ivory tower, and suggests using the upcoming subjugation practice as an opportunity to handle Se-Hoon personally. The official agrees to provide solid support for the plan, provided it doesn't cause any further public issues for their faction. The man's tone shifts, becoming much more ominous as he begins to deliver a final, stern ultimatum. Looming over the student with a dark, threatening aura, he warns that if another failure occurs, the student had better give up his succession rights. The shadows of the two men stretch across the floor as the official walks away, leaving the student in a heavy, silent room. The Borsapa top student remains alone in the room, staring down at the broken remains of his subordinate lying in the hospital bed. He mumbles Se-Hoon's name to himself, clearly marking the protagonist as his primary target for the coming days. The scene shifts to Se-Hoon, where a system notification displays the details of a new skill called Awakening Dream. It is a form of self-hypnosis that triggers to clear a clouded mind. Se-Hoon sits alone in a chair, his arms crossed as he contemplates the unsettling nature of acquiring a skill that requires a minimum level of relevant aptitude. He muses that while realizing a hidden talent is one thing, developing a completely new one that he previously didn't have is much more concerning. A dark vision of a battlefield littered with bodies flickers in his mind, as the Awakening Dream skill activates to stabilize his psyche against the mental contamination. His amber eyes snap open, the clarity of the skill's effect taking hold of his senses and sharpening his focus. He realizes that the skill functions like a mental barrier, shielding him from the burden of his past memories. Louise Valent walks into the quiet room, her presence breaking his concentration as she approaches from behind. She stops near the wall, looking at him with a questioning gaze, and asking what he's doing just sitting there alone in the dark. He looks back at her calmly, telling her that he was simply meditating while waiting for her. The two sit across from each other, discussing their discharge procedures and the thoroughness of the doctor, An Jiangwen. She notes that the man is a true professional. Louise smiles faintly, admitting that the doctor has truly helped her in various ways over the past half-year of her recovery. She looks off into the distance, her expression becoming more serious as she shifts the conversation to her future at the academy. The view shifts to the clear sky outside, as she mentions that she met with Professor Charles the day before. In a flashback, she stands before Professor Charles's desk as he offers her a special scholarship to the Ivory Tower to commemorate her being able to use magic again. She politely but firmly declines the offer, informing him that she plans to transfer to the martial arts department when she returns to school. Professor Charles sits back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he notes that the magic she's learned is quite different from standard theories. He tells her that he won't force her if that's her decision, but invites her to come find him anytime if she changes her mind. Back in the present, Louise forces a faint smile. Louise's smile fades as the memory of the interaction continues to weigh on her, her hand tightening as she recalls the meeting. She clutches her head, her eyes wide with a suppressed fury as she thinks about how hard it was to hold back the urge to kill the professor right on the spot.